across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Good afternoon. Welcome to the Home of Common Sense. 3 minutes after 1 o'clock. Julia, of course, fine show from Julia as ever. Back tomorrow at 10 right here on Talk. Lots to come this afternoon, including Rupert Lowe accusing Nigel Farage's Reform UK of trying to weaponise the criminal justice system against him after the Crown Prosecution Service confirmed that no charges would be brought over claims that he verbally threatened the party's chairman. Nothing to see here. Where does that leave Reform and this whole rather messy debacle? Also this afternoon, the Royal College of Psychiatrists has pulled support for the assisted dying bill in England and Wales as separate proposals in Scotland pass their first stage. It's a massively contentious issue. Where do you stand on supporting the assisted dying legislation? And the boss of British Gas has cast doubt on Labour's pledge to cut household energy bills, saying net zero won't bring electricity prices down. So what do we make of that one? Details on the way. Everything you need to know, all the breaking news right here on Talk. 0344 499 1000. Just a point on the Rupert Lowe story. This was always... I tell you why this was deeply fascinating. I think not just to me. It was deeply fascinating because this wasn't very reformy. There'd been an internal row and clearly there was a fallout and I'm sure a battle of egos and stuff that goes on almost in any business, but certainly in any political party. You know, when you've got big figures, and these guys are all big figures in their own way, then you're going to have rows. There's going to be vainglorious moments where one wants to supersede the other or claim victory over a certain point or fundamentally disagrees with the direction of travel. That's kind of the nature of the beast, and skilled politicians find their way usually of getting around it, and then they all shake hands and go for a beer. That's the usual way. But you would have thought if any party was going to find their way around it and settle the scores over a pint of bitter in the Rose and Crown, it would be Reform UK. I mean, this is the party that kind of scold others for having hissy fits and not being able to get over it. And yet there they were at the centre of this. I'm not suggesting it wasn't fundamentally serious internally for those involved. There might have been a lot at stake. But, you know, calling the old bill and saying, I think this guy's insulted me or whatever the heck it was. And it's ended up with the Crown Prosecution Service saying that there's no criminal charges here. They can't build a case on this with any realistic chance of survival in a courtroom. It just seems to have been in tatters. They said, having considered a number of witness statements, we have concluded that there is insufficient evidence to provide a realistic prospect of conviction. That's what they said. And do you know what? Tell us something we didn't already know. I think most people kind of thought that in the first place. I would be interested, however, just in your overview. Look, it's not a breaking news story in the conventional sense. It's not. No one's reinventing wheels or suggesting fundamentally that this is going to change Rupert Lowe as a person or Reform UK as a person. But if you are a Reform voter, how do you feel about that? Because there were people at the time, and I still see them on social media, who parted company with Reform. I think they're small in numbers, but they parted company because they were very much behind Rupert Lowe. They liked the cut of his jib, they liked what he had to say, and, you know, Rupert Lowe they felt was a fairly totemic figure within Reform and a massive loss to Reform. And I would also echo that point. But whatever happened on the inside of the party, clearly they couldn't make it work, so they went their separate ways. How do you feel now? Has that changed fundamentally your view of Reform or indeed of Rupert Lowe? 0344 499 1000. We'll take some calls on that. I think it's genuinely interesting in the world of a party that is emerging so successfully almost by the hour, that this is, you know, a fifth of their MPs, one man, Rupert Lowe, found it, and a big star player of them, which some argue might have been the problem, found himself having to walk the plank to become an independent MP after half an hour of being in Westminster. Your thoughts on that? Also this as well, assisted dying. I said to Julia just before the news, as you might have heard, in my job, in our job, you're kind of meant to have very forthright, robust views. Sitting on the fence is not always a good look. I'm a pest for nuance. I can't help it. I call it OCD, ADHD, call it whatever you like. I have a fine nuance. I have to articulate the nuance, even if I feel strongly about something. I'll always go, well, actually, maybe there is another view on this, or maybe we're not looking at it from the wrong angle. It's just in my DNA to do that, okay? And sometimes that does involve slightly diluting the robustness of your opinion. You know, in my job, you're meant to bang the table, shout a bit and sound incredulous, even if somebody just opens a door. But on this, I think I speak for many people where you kind of find yourself going, assisted dying, would I support assisted dying? Family doctors in England are certainly absolutely divided, according to recent research. And this is, I think, a fairly convincing insight into the problem, not with individuals and family members, but actually the medical world. I mentioned there at the beginning that there's now a fundamental issue with psychiatrists who've pulled their support for the assisted dying bill. Whether that's connected to how the bill now looks to what it originally looked like, I don't know. But certainly you've got GPs. They asked more than 5,000 GPs, sent a questionnaire asking whether they agreed with changing the law to allow assisted dying from certain terminal illness. People in England and Wales, this one. More than 1,000 GPs replied, with about 500 saying they were against assisted dying and about 400 saying they were in favour. So you've got an absolute divide in the medical world on this. One doctor, one of the 400 who said they supported it, described the bill as long overdue and a basic human right. Is it your human right to end your life? And this is it. I think individually, as Julia said, I think I should have that right. I genuinely think. But then what if you lose your marbles and you don't really have a sense of what is going on? You have some kind of degenerative illness. It's terminal. What do they mean by terminal? You've got 6 months to live. 6 years to live. There are many examples of people who thought they'd about to lose a family member, only for miracle of all miracles, the whole thing turns around and said family member is alive and well and playing squash every Thursday afternoon. That kind of stuff does happen. But one doctor said, we are keeping human bodies alive in the most inhumane manner. One said, how do we ethically justify forcing these bodies to continue to exist in this way? Current laws prevent, of course, the medical world from helping any patient to carry out their dying wish. We know that in Scotland, yesterday, a separate bill to legalise assisted dying did pass an initial vote. That doesn't mean it's guaranteed to become law, but it passed its initial vote. There's many reasons to talk about this. One is the basic question: do you support the notion of assisted dying? Perhaps more interestingly are the stories of your own circumstances, whether that's somebody who was and did have to suffer the indignity of pain and existing in a way that that person never would have wanted to. But the only option that was left open to them was to suffer, lay there for weeks or months on end before they died naturally. You might have that experience. Simultaneously, you might have actually had the one I mentioned a second ago, where you thought you were about to lose Nana, and then suddenly, you know, blimey, she came back round. She wasn't dying after all, still with us. Those kind of stories, I sense, are really the ones that throw the spanner in the works of the overarching story here. So when you say, do you support assisted dying, it has to come with some caveats. We'll talk to one very senior palliative care doctor shortly, and that's another area where those that work in that field say, well, to be honest, palliative care is so good that nobody needs to be in the position that the medic I just quoted, forcing bodies to continue to exist into this situation until they die. The idea that it's long overdue and a basic human right is completely unthinkable to the palliative care world. 0344 499 1000 is where you will find us. Do you support the assisted dying bill? We'll talk about that. The issues around reform as well. The BBC are in the dock as well. Talks on that coming as well. I said as well quite a lot there, didn't I? I could have said also as well. Chloe Dobbs is with us, political commentator. Good to have you with us, Chloe.
Hi, Ian.
Lots to talk about here today, and particularly that issue of the legislation around assisted dying. We know that the Scottish Parliament have backed, certainly on the first vote, the bill brought forward by a Lib Dem, Liam MacArthur, allows terminally ill patients to end their life on the NHS. Let's have a listen to that announcement from Holyrood yesterday.
The result of the vote on motion 17416 in the name of Liam MacArthur is yes 70, no 56. There was one abstention. The motion is therefore agreed.
So even there, Chloe, I mean, it's still pretty close. This is not unequivocal stuff, and that's the problem. That's MPs or politicians voting. We know, based on that one survey from GPs, that there is equally a more compelling divide, in fact, in the medical world.
Yeah, there is a lot of controversy around this, and I don't think it's a question that there is an easy answer to. And clearly, as you can see in that vote that happened there in Holyrood, people are very divided about this. I think there are a lot of people who think that in principle they like the idea of having the right to end their own life, but they look at the state of the NHS and see how much of a mess it is, and they see, you know, doctors are so overrun and so stressed in our NHS at the moment that they frequently make mistakes. Do you really want them to, you know, risk making a mistake ending someone's life when they shouldn't? You raise the important question there, Ian, of, you know, what if I've lost my marbles? And that's not an out there possibility. I mean, most old people, I mean, all the old people I've dealt with in my life who are near the end, they've all lost their marbles by the end, regardless of whether they've got a, dementia diagnosis or not. So it's very, very difficult to make sure the right safeguards are in place. And then you have issues with, children who are hoping to get some cash out of the will, who maybe want, their parent that they're not so fond of, perhaps to die early. It is a very difficult situation, and you've really got to make sure that the NHS is in the right position before we bring in something like this. I perhaps would be in favour of it, but I don't think that the NHS is in the right state at the moment. Absolutely not. We need to make sure that palliative care is in its best state before we consider something like this. I think it's going to be really interesting to watch and see what happens in Westminster with this, because I think there are a lot of MPs who voted for it at the previous reading, not necessarily because they were in favour of it, but because they wanted to see what is the final thing going to look like. What safeguards will there be in place? I think a lot of people are very wary after we were initially told that there would be High Court approval in every assisted dying case, but then we had Kim Ledbetter announce that actually that's not going to be the case anymore, that safeguard's not going to be in place. I don't know if that's because the court said, you know, are you having a laugh? We're so overrun, we have so many waiting lists as it is, that there's no way we could do that. But yeah, it's going to be really, really interesting to watch this and see what happens. But I'm very sceptical about this working well in the NHS in its current state. Indeed.
Well, the third reading in England takes place on Friday. This is, as you mentioned, sponsored by Kim Ledbetter, the Labour MP. But it's interesting that since the second and the third, we've got the Royal College of Physicians, top gastroenterologists, now saying the bill is not fit for purpose. It lacks key protections. And I thought the interesting group of medics were psychiatrists, because they fear the bill would overload already stretched mental health services and haven't been given a clear role in decision panels either. Now, of course, one of the big, perhaps a few years ago, we wouldn't have factored this in quite the same way or with the same emphasis. But the mental health element, which is very much front and centre of so much at the moment, is clearly key, because you will have people arguing their case. They want to end their life because of mental health issues. And in fact, if they don't have this done medically, they will end it anyway. And they regard that as being terminal in some senses. You've got all of these big question marks and these uncertainties around this. And certainly the mental health aspect is pretty key on this.
Absolutely. And as it stands, the NHS, the way that they deal with mental health patients is absolutely abhorrent. If you are lucky enough to be given help for your mental health on the NHS, what that consists of is a prescription of drugs. It doesn't mean actual proper therapy and dealing with whatever trauma you've got inside of you. So there are a lot of people who have had severe mental health issues for a very long time who perhaps could be rehabilitated, but they've been put in a position where they feel like their mental illness is terminal because they simply aren't being given the help that they need, and private therapy and help is just so unbelievably expensive. I think it would be a very sad state of affairs if we see people who have not been given the help that they need from the NHS. They've simply been given drugs for their mental health, ending their lives when actually they could have lived a very, wonderful, thriving life if they simply got the help that they need.
Indeed.
And I think that with mental health and with older people, I think a lot of people are very concerned that without the right provisions in place, politicians could potentially abuse the assisted dying bill to save costs. Oh, how about rather than deal with the very old 80, 90-year-old deal with their problems, or the younger person with severe mental issues, rather than foot the cost of dealing with their problems, why not end their life early? And I think when we saw things like the winter fuel payment cuts and whatnot, and people start to think maybe Starmer doesn't care about the old pensioners, I think there are a lot of worries. And there was some statistics put out by the Financial Times recently, and I think they said that over 80-year-olds cost the state typically 50 grand a year. That's a very significant cost to the government, one that I'm sure they'd be quite happy to cut down. If we don't have the right safeguards in place, you could see them pushing for more lives to be ended on the NHS. I know that sounds sinister, but can't trust politicians, can you?
Well, that's a fair point. Let's move to this story. Talking to politicians, all kicking off, as the phrase goes, over there at Reform UK. Well, sort of. We know that Rupert Lowe, who was a Reform MP, now sits as an independent, was originally facing allegations, threats of violence towards the chairman, Zia Youssef. Serious complaints of bullying as well. So Reform asked the police to look into this. Barristers were involved. I'm sure tens of thousands of pounds have been spent on this as well on either side. And the CPS have come back and said, look, there's really no evidence here for any kind of prosecution, which I think is what most of us sort of thought would happen.
Yes, I'm really not surprised by this, even if the comments from Reform UK claiming that Zia Youssef had received threats, even if there was some credit to those, I just thought, well, what evidence are they going to have for that? Just their word of mouth. They haven't got this on camera or on some sort of recording or in a message. I thought there's no way the CPS are going to bother wasting their time on this. And what you find at the CPS is that the more junior people in the CPS may be willing to make a charge with just a few witness statements, but when a case is being dealt with by someone who's highly experienced in the CPS, they like to see a lot of evidence to be willing to make a charge. And I'm sure that this one, given the amount of press around it, the case would have been dealt with by someone quite senior who wouldn't have made a charge on the basis of a few witness statements. So this isn't really a surprise. I think Rupert Lowe's statement that we've seen him put out in a letter on Twitter is pretty damning, in that he's really gone on the attack towards Nigel Farage and says this man cannot be Prime Minister. He called him a coward and a viper, and you clearly saw him hinting at the possibility of him starting a new party, which a lot of people have been wondering about for some time. But I think there are a lot of people, including myself, who see, all the momentum is with the Reform Party. We saw at the local elections that this Rupert Lowe saga didn't damage them very much. Reform were very successful. And that creating another little party starting from scratch, I honestly think it's a waste of time. As sad as many people may be about the whole saga with Rupert Lowe, even people who think that Rupert Lowe, even if they're not on his side generally, I think most people think it's been dealt with in quite a childish, unprofessional way and have been upset with Reform about that. But I don't think it's a good enough reason to just abandon the party and start from scratch again. We're just going to end up dividing up the vote on the right.
Yeah, I think that's exactly it. Yeah, and imagine a third party there. I mean, good luck with launching a third party. I often wonder whether you're almost more in a better position just to stand as an independent in these kind of things.
Yeah.
We are now seeing independent politicians getting elected. More from Chloe in a few moments' time. Lots to talk about. Chloe Dobbs with us, political commentator. We'll take your calls on the assisted dying story as well. Do you support it? Is it something you could run with, or are you very, very cautious and wary about that ever becoming law? Also, very different kind of story. Rupert Lowe and Reform. What do you make of that? What are your thoughts as a Reform voter? 0344 499 1000.
I put it in writing, and they basically replied and said, we can't remove him out of your theatre, but what we can do is we can cancel your surgery, we can move you to a different doctor with a different consultant at an unknown date. And I couldn't believe it. I said, well, you're prolonging my pain now because it needs to be done. It's like an emergency. With endometriosis, it's all over my bowels. It was a big operation. It was a joint case with the colorectal team. A lot of organisation went in. They just bypassed all that.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
24 minutes after 1 o'clock. Welcome to Talk. We've got Chloe Dobbs with us, the political commentator, chewing the fat on the big stories of the day. Interesting net zero story, Chloe. There's always a net zero story out there somewhere. It will not bring electricity prices down, says, no, not a conspiracy theorist, the British gas boss. The CEO, Chris O'Shea, warned that shifting to renewables won't significantly reduce UK electricity prices for consumer. He highlighted that the contracts for difference guarantee renewable producers a minimum price, preventing major price reductions. Now, of course, that would be OK had Ed Miliband and Labour not dined out forever on telling us that this is the surefire way to get cheaper bills.
I mean, surprise, surprise, net zero isn't going to bring your energy costs down. This is what we have all been predicting for a long time. And I feel like a lot of people are going to feel very vindicated now after hearing this come from the CEO. I think that they've lived in this delusion in the Labour Party that we can have net zero as well as having an economy that is growing and thriving and costs coming down for people. I think you've got to be realistic and you've got to admit to people, yeah, if we're going to pursue this net zero thing, that might mean some hits to our energy cost in the short to medium term. Your bills are not going to go down. Yet they've lied and lied and lied and just sold people a complete fantasy. And now they're having to face the consequences of that, which is an electorate that is absolutely furious about the fact that they have been lied to. Now, what this boss has said is that, yes, a benefit to us having things like solar and wind being expanded in the UK is that it may reduce the number of big fluctuations in prices caused by things like the Ukraine war. We saw a huge rise in petrol prices and whatnot then. But the overall general average cost is definitely not going to come down, he has said. And we had, a while back, we had Jürgen, the GB Energy chief, saying in an interview that he didn't know when energy costs were going to come down for people, that wasn't his job. And everyone thought, hang on, I thought that was the whole point in setting up GB Energy, was to bring people's costs down. And he very clearly showed that he had no idea how on earth energy costs were going to come down. And now Keir Starmer's in a pretty difficult position when it comes to Ed Miliband and his net zero policies. We've got more and more evidence coming out and more big people. We've had Tony Blair and the unions and whatnot coming out saying, you've got to change track on this. This is not working. This is not going to be good for the British people. But in the grassroots of the Labour Party, Ed Miliband and net zero is just so popular. It's very difficult for Keir Starmer to just boot him out of his job. So I'm not sure what Keir Starmer's going to do about this.
Yeah. Fair point. We will watch with interest and the popcorn. And this story as well, deeply disturbing. Police probing a state involvement in arson attacks on Sir Keir Starmer, with a suspect being questioned by counter-terror officers. This, of course, is reference his own house that he owns and family members live in. Also a flat that he was connected to and a car as well. But let's have a listen to, you don't often get these moments at PMQs, Kemi Badenoch on this very matter.
I would like to say to the Prime Minister how horrified I was to hear about the attack on his family home. It is completely unacceptable. And I think I speak for the whole House when I say that this wasn't just an attack on him, but on all of us and on our democracy.
There it is. So naturally, no one's going to make party politics, you'd have thought, out over a potential attack on a politician. And we know what sadly has happened to some politicians in the past. Extraordinary story, though. I mean, a car, a flat that was once lived in by Keir Starmer, and a family home that's now lived in by his sister-in-law. Hard to fathom, certainly from the outside, what's going on here.
Yeah, this is an absolutely shocking story, and I'm certainly not glad to hear this news. I know there are a few people on Twitter going, haha, Keir Starmer, you deserve it, but I think no politician deserves to be attacked and having their property attacked in this way. Now, when I first saw this story, all I heard about was the attack on his house that he owns, but is no longer living in North London, and I thought, that's pretty shocking, but this probably is just some voter who's got a bee in their bonnet about Keir Starmer that's up to no good. But now it's emerging that this is looking far more like it was pre-planned, and potentially it may have been planned by a hostile state or an actual terrorist. I think it's absolutely shocking that they went to the length to go and attack a flat that he owned back in the 1990s and a car that he previously owned, for them to figure out that exactly what he previously owned and to go and attack those even if he's not there. It seems very well thought through and properly planned. I don't think this was just one little on a whim attack. So I'm really interested to see what comes out of this investigation, if we find out for sure exactly what the motive was behind this. And there may be questions about more security measures being needed to put in place for him and other politicians. I think politicians both in the Labour Party and across the rest of the House will be quite concerned for their safety after seeing this. And I think that it's a shame to see attacks like this, because I think it puts people off becoming politicians and serving their country, because they think you're going to have to live a very dangerous life, and that's going to reduce the quality of politicians we get in the future if that's the case.
And also this story, Sadiq Khan is the latest person to distance themselves from Keir Starmer's immigration remarks, criticised by MPs. They claimed it echoed Enoch Powell's Rivers of Blood speech. Let's just remind ourselves of what the Prime Minister said that caused the problem.
These rules become even more important. Without them, we risk becoming an island of strangers, not a nation that walks forward together. So when you have an immigration system that seems almost designed to permit abuse, that encourages some businesses to bring in lower paid workers rather than invest in our young people, or simply one that is sold by politicians to the British people on an entirely false premise, then you're not championing growth, you're not championing justice, or however else people defend the status quo. You're actually contributing to the forces that are slowly pulling our country apart. So yes, I believe in this. I believe we need to reduce immigration significantly.
But it's that island of strangers comment, Chloe, that seems to have got him in hot water with the left. They didn't like that very much. I'm not quite sure why. I thought it was, of all the things, I don't believe Keir Starmer will have any success with this. I don't believe he really believes it, but I certainly didn't. The island of strangers thing didn't jump out at me going, oh my God, he said the island of strangers. He's clearly Enoch Powell Mark II. That seemed like a fairly tame and obvious observation of where we're at.
Yeah, I thought that it was fairly tame, and I think a lot of people heard it and said in response, no, we're not risking becoming an island of strangers, we already are one. A lot of people think he didn't go far enough, but he has caused an absolute storm with his party. You've got a lot of MPs speaking out and denouncing him for, as you say, being like Enoch Powell, as they claim. And he may be willing, he will have known that this will have caused a storm, but he thinks it's worth it to try and gain back some of the people who voted for reform and switched from the Labour Party at the local elections. That's clearly what he's trying to do here. But I'm not sure it's really been the win that he was quite expecting, because I think most people who are voting reform have listened to this and said, hang on, that goes completely against what Keir Starmer said in the past. Why should I believe a word that he says? Why should I trust this guy more than Nigel Farage, who's always stuck to his word on this when it comes to immigration policy? So I'm not sure it's going to pay off dividends for him.
Indeed. We will again sit back and see and wait for Chapter 2 of this one, where it goes next. Chloe, thank you as ever. Chloe Dobbs, the political commentator with us on the programme. Anything that we've discussed there, throw your comments into 0344 499 1000, particularly the Rupert Lowe CPS ruling. Nothing to see here. No charges to be put against Mr Lowe. Where does that leave Reform UK, or is this storm in a teacup territory that you don't actually give a hoot about? And the assisted dying bill, it's back third reading on Friday. Friday. Holyrood, the Scottish Parliament, yesterday backed, certainly initially, the idea of moving forward with this. It's a long way off becoming law. But it does divide. And the medical community, the medical world, seem to be very divided on this. GPs, about 50-50. Psychiatrists and others are concerned too. But where do you sit in terms of support for this? We've got some interesting comments and calls on the way on that one. 0344 499 1000. We'll chat to a palliative care doctor in just a moment. We'll have a very different view how you should treat and deal with patients at their end of life stage. More of that on the way. This is Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
This is Talk. Lots of comment coming in from you on this one. We'll come to those in just a moment. This is the story of 25-2, by the way. The Royal College of Psychiatrists has withdrawn its support for assisted dying in England and Wales ahead of the third reading of the bill on Friday in the House of Commons. A survey of over 1,000 GPs also found around half opposed legalising assisted dying, calling it dangerous and even cruel. Despite concerns, Scottish MSPs yesterday voted to move forward with plans to legalise NHS assisted dying for terminally ill patients. In a moment, we'll speak to Rabbi Jonathan Romain, Chair of Dignity in Dying's Religious Alliance, and get a view on that. First, Dr. Ketan Skaronsky, who is a palliative care doctor. Very big concerns, Dr. Skaronsky, on this one. I remember speaking to you before on this. You work in a world where you make people comfortable and out of pain in those final days and weeks, and I suppose from that perspective you would be scratching your head as to why anybody would want to do anything differently.
Well, I mean, I absolutely understand people who've been through very tragic situations with family members or who are suffering themselves with terminal illnesses, and understand that motivation, and I'm very empathetic towards that motivation, and I come across it obviously in the course of my work. But it's amazing how when you do provide people with proper holistic palliative care that really addresses them, as a complete person, both in their physical aspects, but in their mental and also spiritual aspects as well, it really does take away a lot of that worry and a lot of that suffering for patients as well. And I think it's just important to start when we're talking about this by not scaring people, because since this whole debate's come up, the people who are proposing the bill often paint all deaths as these places of suffering and misery, which the only choice is either suffer and have misery or take assisted suicide. And so I've had lots of anxiety from patients actually in the last couple of months because of this whole debate, because patients who receive a terminal illness suddenly feel like they're being given not just a sentence of death, but a sentence of suffering and torture, which actually isn't the case in most deaths. Most deaths can be managed very well.
But you must come across patients, and colleagues must have come across patients who've said, "Doctor, I've got weeks to live. I'm not in a good place. Even if I'm not in chronic pain, I am in some pain. I can't do anything. However, I'm literally just laying here. Why is there not something I could take to end this?" You must have experienced those requests.
Yeah, from time to time we do, and often it's an immediate reaction to a change of circumstances. So one of the reasons that the Royal College of Psychiatrists is now opposed, they were never in support of this bill. They were neutral on it, and now they're opposed to the particular bill that's being proposed by Kim Leadbeater. One of the main reasons they're opposed is because that sudden change in circumstances, that sudden diagnosis, leads people into a state of shock, a state of depression, and they can react in a very strongly emotional way, which is completely understandable. But it's actually often just a case of time and support, and knowing that they're supported is enough for people to acclimatise to this new reality, and find that there are many areas of quality in their life that still give them joy, and that they can then move on from that. In the same way that anybody who becomes disabled, the initial disability is a great shock, but then people who've been disabled for many years or who were born disabled will testify, and have testified, as they did yesterday in Scotland, as MSPs did in Scotland who have disabilities, that their life is very much worth living. And even if their mobility is limited, even if they're dependent on other people, they take great joy in their life. So I think I'm just worried that this whole debate discussion is amplifying that fear and that anxiety that people experience when they receive the bad news that they've got a terminal diagnosis, or the bad news that they have now become disabled in some way, and it might lead people to rash decisions, when actually, from our experience, we know that time and support are what's needed in most cases for people to feel a lot better.
Fundamentally, what is your objection to this bill? I know that we can talk about amendments and changing this phrase or that phrase, but invariably, when it comes to these kind of bills, much like termination of a pregnancy, people are usually sort of for it or against it, no matter what caveats or whatever you put in. For you, is it a moral thing? Is it about more of a kind of spiritual thing, or is this that you sense abuse could happen in down the maybe 20, 30 years away, but we could end up in a really dark place?
I think it's both. As a doctor, I went into medicine to help people to preserve life, not to preserve life against all other considerations, but to preserve health and preserve comfort as well. And we do discuss things with patients about whether they want to carry on treatments that will sustain their life or not, and people can withdraw from treatments that other people would want to carry on with, and that's absolutely fine, down to people's choice. And then they have a natural death from whichever illness they're suffering from, with all of the support that palliative care can offer. And I think that's all very legitimate, and there's a good spectrum of decision there. But I think where we cross the line is where we start to poison our patients, to kill them, which is what this bill will enable. And that it is an assisted suicide. It would be me taking part in the killing of my patients, or some of my colleagues taking part in the killing of my patients. And I also treat people who come in to hospital having attempted suicide, and I help them on the road to recovery as well, both in the acute setting and then later on. And it seems to fly in the face of what I do.
So what would you, just a final point, what would you do then if this did become law and you were the person, the medic, the clinician in charge of that decision, where the patient says, I would like to take that medication now, please, doctor? Or would you leave the profession?
No, I would have no part in those decisions. We'd have to see how it plays out in practice, in terms of if I would be forced to cooperate in some way. But it would be very difficult for very many of my colleagues. And one of the things that's very unfortunate is that the bill doesn't allow opt-outs for hospices. So hospices would be forced to be involved in this in some way. Individual doctors might be able to opt out, but the institutions themselves would be forced to take part in it, which I think would, not just poison the patient directly, but poison the palliative care system which we provide, which is the best palliative care system in the world at present.
On that point, we will speak again, I'm sure. Dr. Kiertan Skowronski, palliative care doctor, very much against what is being talked about and debated. Let's get a word on this from Rabbi Jonathan Romain, chair of Dignity in Dying's Religious Alliance, and well known, Jonathan, for your views on this. You heard what the doctor just said. In fact, he used the word killing patients. What's your response to that? Good afternoon.
Yeah, well, hello to you. Well, he's wrong in some respects. Firstly, it's not the doctor killing, because in fact, no doctor will kill any patient because they have to administer the medication themselves. That's absolutely crucial because we want to know that the person is doing it of their own free will. In other words, the doctors will be involved in giving the prescription, but it has to be the patient themselves.
But that's as good as, isn't it? If you're a doctor and you're very much against this, the fact that you would have to, write down and put your signature on a piece of paper, somebody like our previous guest, our doctor, would feel that was them actually doing it.
Exactly right, which is why in the bill there is specifically an opt-out. There is a conscience clause, just in the same way as in the abortion bill. So if a doctor has moral or whatever objections, they do not have to do it. Now, he is right, and I'll agree with him here, there is such a thing as a good death. And I've seen many good deaths, and that's great and wonderful. Let's hope that we all have it, you and me included. But also, let's be very honest, there are some pretty awful deaths. Yeah. And that's what this bill is about. If people want to carry on to their last breath, great, wonderful, they should have every support, and including palliative care. But if they are dying in agony, and they are dying, and they want to let go, then in whose interest are we forcing them to live on in pain? That's really the key question. And it's really about options, giving that person the option to stagger on or to say to God, to the family, thank you, it's been a great life, but I gently won't let go. So why aren't we giving people those options? We all hope for a good life. Why shouldn't we have a good death as well?
But sorry to just interject, Jonathan, but isn't the issue there that in that Venn diagram there's a big old grey area in the middle that says, well, it might not be as black and white as that. There are, what are the circumstances specifically that would allow someone to be in the position to take their own life? Do we water it down over the years? Mental health is clearly, as we've heard today from the Royal College of Psychiatrists, a big concern on this one. So there's nuance to this.
Absolutely right. By the way, it is misleading to say that the Royal College of Psychiatrists has withdrawn its support. They are not opposed. What they have done is they have reinforced their neutrality.
They were neutral before, I think.
I get that. People have gone the other way because all the Royal Colleges, nurses, psychiatrists, surgeons, plus the British Medical Association have changed from being opposed to being neutral. So that's really important to make that clear. As for your Venn diagram, that's really a critical area. And there are 3 red lines. The person has to be terminally ill. They have to be mentally competent, so it wouldn't apply to anyone with Alzheimer's, for instance. And thirdly, it has to be of their own free will. And if you've got those 3, there are many people who still won't want it, but for those people who do, motor neuron, Parkinson's, cancer, then they should have that option. That's the key word, having that option.
Yeah. It's very close, though, isn't it? When you look at what happened in Holyrood yesterday, 70 to 50 or thereabouts. If you look at that recent survey that was done by the BBC, 50-50 from GPs. So it's not, there's no sort of clear-cut, unequivocal support or concern either way, it seems, on this.
Yeah, except that in the way we run our society, we don't say it's got to have a 75 or 80% rule, do we?
Sure.
Bill that goes
but
past.
This is a matter of life and death, isn't it? So I suppose it sits in a very specific place.
Yeah, but what's really fascinating, to your point, is that every country who's introduced assisted dying, and there are something like 30 or 40 countries now who've done so, none of them have reversed it. In other words, none of them have said, oops, we made a mistake, it's not working, the figures are appalling. And we're very closely aligned to what happened in Oregon, which has, by the way, had exactly the same system for 27 years. So we've got over a quarter of a century's worth of knowing what the facts are, monitoring, regulating it. This will not not be a leap into the dark. It'll be new for us in Britain, but we can really learn from other countries. And what's really fascinating is that people like Dr. Catalan, people in the palliative care world who originally opposed it, now work very harmoniously with the assisted dying world. In other words, it's complementary. And one other thing just to say is that, yes, of course, palliative care is wonderful and, you know, really needs every support. But as the parliamentary, the Health and Social Care Committee showed only last month, there are many people whom it cannot help. For those it can, great. But for those it can't, why not give them the option of this alternative? That's what it's all about, giving individuals a say in how they not only live their life, but end their life.
Jonathan, always good to get your views on these things. It's clearly a crucial issue. Rabbi Jonathan Remain, Chair of Dignity in Dying's Religious Alliance. He mentioned Oregon there. That seems to be the template. I think that is more or less what we are copying. There are concerns around this, naturally. I think everyone for themselves goes, yeah, if it was me, I want that choice. I'm not sure if it was, you know, would my old nan have that sense of being a burden? We're told that you couldn't take your own life in this way based on the burden thing. It would have to be, so you'd have to have a terminal diagnosis, and there are other factors as well. Your thoughts on this? 0344 499 1000.
I put it in writing, and they basically replied and said, we can't remove him out of your theatre, but what we can do is we can cancel your surgery, we can move you to a different doctor with a different consultant at an unknown date. And I couldn't believe it. I said, well, you're prolonging my pain now because it needs to be done. It's like an emergency. With endometriosis, it's all over my bowels. It was a big operation. It was a joint case with the colorectal team. A lot of organisation went in. They just bypassed all that.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
This one from Simon, who says, I think regarding the assisted dying bill, it should be agreed in Parliament that a 60 or 75% vote is what is required to make this bill go through. I don't think a simple 51-49 split is appropriate for such a significant decision. And that was the point. I tend to agree with that. And I don't know, I mean, people have other bits of policy that they will say, well, that should also be a 75% majority to carry it through. I did put that point to Jonathan Remain as well, given the significance and the severity of what we're talking about here. And one in from Nick in Warrenport in Northern Ireland, who says, thanks for covering this very divisive topic. My dad died in 81 from cancer. We watched him suffer immense pain. I remember him sitting with us, pretending to be interested in the TV. His knuckles would be white in an attempt to bear the pain and spare us from realising what he was going through. He was stoic, a virtue sadly lacking these days. Near the end, I lay on the bed with him watching Pot Black. God, remember that, Friday night. From my peripheral vision, I could see tears rolling down his cheeks. I plucked up the nerve to talk to him, and he said he wanted to go now, but he was worried about my mum. She died a year later. He thought about eating a load of his morphine tablets, but that didn't sit square with him. He was ready to check out, and surely that was his decision, but he just needed someone to quietly help him. I understand that GPs are split and civil servants bend with the breeze, but there's been a survey of the dying, pain-ridden patients. What do they believe as they stare into whatever eternity they think awaits them? That's a very beautifully written piece, Nick, and thank you for sharing that as well. That would have been a poignant point in your life that you'll never forget, of course, laying with a dying relative, well, particularly a parent, and I've done that as well. It is profound and something you will never regret doing, but the detail of that, when someone is essentially saying, you know, I'd quite like to go now, not in 3 or 4 days. These are long old days, you know. Kathleen in Romford on this issue of assisted dying. What have you got for us, Kathleen? Afternoon.
I don't really know, but that was a lovely reply from Nick. In fact, it upset me.
Yeah.
I agree with it. I've got terminal lung cancer. I've been fighting for a long time, and things have started to go wrong, and I had to have a brain tumour removed last year, and they told me that I could die on the table. Didn't bother me, because I thought, well, I won't know nothing about it. And I think that is half the thing. You don't know nothing about that, but when you know what's coming, when enough is enough, enough is enough.
I mean, it is difficult, isn't it? Because even some patients that are, whose life is in a lot of pain towards the end. Not everybody, of course. I mean, lots of people, probably most people don't die in pain, but some do. But some of those people don't want to be given this option. They are quite, willing to continue that, not so much battle, but that existence, despite the pain. I don't know whether that's fear or whether it's a religious belief or what it is.
In fact, I thought the rabbi spoke a lot more sense than what some of the other people have done.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? And I've got to be honest, I lost my husband to cancer as well, and it was horrendous, right? I just think, why are you trying to keep me alive for another 2 or 3 days or 2 weeks?
Yeah.
My time is up. Unless you're the person going through it, no one understands what it's like.
How do you feel, Kathleen? It's quite difficult to ask you this question, but given your own diagnosis, what are your own thoughts on your own position?
Well, when I say enough's enough, then it's enough.
Yeah.
In fact, I did ask my oncologist the other week, and first time I've ever asked her, and I was diagnosed 9 years ago. I've been lucky, but I've had so much treatment.
Yeah.
With the brain tumour removed, I've lost my sight. That's not easy. And it's like, and she said, when you say so, Kathleen, we will have a discussion on it. And then I said, so when would you call it enough? She said, well, I think you're not well enough. I said, OK then. And it took me off my guard that I did ask it. But unless you're going through this journey, and I call it a journey because it is a journey, you don't know treatments. I've had radiotherapy, immunotherapy, I've had chemo, I've had a brain tumour removed. Enough, so much you can take.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I'm not ready to go yet, don't get me wrong.
No, you sound chipper, you sound, a very positive person. But I guess there is a point when you've been through so much treatment, you just think, I don't really want to do any more, no matter what it is. I'm just done with that.
It wears you out, I've got to be honest, you know what I mean? And I ain't no youngster, but I just think, and I'm not ready to go yet.
Yeah.
And I thought, well, if I die on the table of a brain tumour, I ain't going to suffer. And I think that is what it is. And my husband was in a hospice. They were marvellous, don't get me wrong. It was horrendous. And if I could have done something, I would have helped him. and that's been truthful, you know what I mean? Because you wouldn't let an animal suffer. If a vet says...
Well, that is it, isn't it? I know that's always that's the one we reach for as a comparison. You know, if it was your dog, my neighbour had their dog put down a week ago, and the reasons were quite obvious. The little thing was in pain at that point, and it was too much pain, and it wasn't fair. So they went to the vets, and the vet did the right thing. But with humans, we don't have that same approach.
I think you should do. I think you should... Yeah, not if you've got mental health problems. That's a different story.
Well, yeah, and that's another one of those grey areas, I guess. Listen, Kathleen, I wish you loads of luck. I wish you another great 9 years as well from that original diagnosis to where you're at now. Kathleen in Romford, thank you to her. Cliff in Berkshire says, I'm not sure about the assisted dying bill. My mind was changed during COVID when out of the blue my GP phoned me up and asked whether I would want to be placed on a ventilator if I needed it and whether I would want them to attempt CPR. I got the impression they wanted me to say no to both. It seemed to be a box-ticking exercise. I did feel pushed towards declining life support, and I was asked because I am immunosuppressed. I don't think it was right to expect someone to make such a decision without time to think about it or to discuss it. It's not the sort of thing you want to get a photo. Oh, hello, it's Dr. Smithers here. How do you feel about the machine being turned up? Really? Yeah, I get it, Cliff. Thank you for that. We'll have more comment on this one. Do you support assisted dying? I can't really ask the question in any other way than that. By way of a gear change, Rupert Lowe, where do you sit on that debacle? Details and your calls on the way. Let's get the news headlines at 2 o'clock.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Good afternoon. Welcome back. 3 minutes after 2 o'clock. This is the home of common sense. What are we talking about here? We've got loads. Rupert Lowe accusing Nigel Farage's Reform UK of trying to weaponise the criminal justice system against him. This is after the Crown Prosecution Service confirmed that no charges would be brought over claims that he verbally threatened the party chairman. I mean, is that really the way to... Of all the parties you might think would sort something out over a pint, it would be these guys. But it got messy. Where does it go next? And if you're a Reform voter or supporter, how do you feel about this latest turn? Also this afternoon, the Royal College of Psychiatrists has no support. They are neutral, I should say, for the assisted dying bill in England and Wales. This comes after Scotland passed their first stage of this bill just yesterday. The third reading happens in the UK, in the rest of England, in England, on Friday. We will watch with interest. We're taking your calls on that. Do you support, do you not support, etc. And your own personal experiences when you've been in that position with a loved one. And prisoners will be released from jail as little as a third of the way through their sentences if they behave well under government plans to tackle the overcrowding issue. Could just build another couple of prisons, I guess. Everything you need to know, all the breaking news right here on Talk 0344 499 1000. One here from Rudo who says, is it me? I don't believe I'm stupid, although many would counter that point. But wouldn't assisting in the death of a person be the equivalent to murder? I can't understand why anyone would allow our UK government to create this type of legislation that would legalise God knows what else. Well, the argument that always comes through, and you heard the Rabbi Jonathan Romain we spoke to, they mentioned Oregon in the States. That's a bit of a template for all of this. It's the kind of reach for example of where they've been doing this for decades. No such issue has ever arisen. It's gone very well. And of all the countries, said Jonathan Romain, around the world that have tried this, no one has ever, and put it into law, no one has ever reversed it and said this isn't working. So that seems to be the evidence for that side of the argument. Kevin Schofield is with us, political editor at HuffPost UK. He's nipped in for a bit of a chinwag, as he does on a Wednesday, hot-footing it from Prime Minister's questions. It was an interesting one because it started out with one of those very sort of noble parliamentary moments where Kemi Badenoch and Keir Starmer agreed on something, which was namely don't set fire to the Prime Minister's house, basically.
Yeah, I think we can all agree with that one.
Yeah, there's always those moments where everyone nodges very sage-like. Yes, yes,
very
absolutely.
consensual.
Yeah, very consensual. I'm terrible what happened to the Prime Minister, and he acknowledged that she'd apparently contacted him when it happened as well.
Yeah.
Lovely to see them all getting along for about 3 seconds.
Yeah, it didn't last very long, and then she went right on the attack. It was on the economy again, national insurance rise, which the Tories call a jobs tax, which she said had led to unemployment going up. Now, there was a bit of confusion. She said 10% higher unemployment now than before. That's not the same as the official figure. Her people afterwards were saying, well, if you look at the numbers that were in employment when we left office compared to now, it's gone up, or the unemployment has gone up by 10%. That's rather besides the point. I thought she was quite punchy. She was fine again, and she's definitely got better. I think the last 3 or 4 weeks has been incremental improvements, and I think he's getting a little bit worse, actually. He seemed very ratty today. He was reading his answers a lot, which I think is a bit of a telltale sign that he's maybe not entirely sure of himself. I think all the criticism over the immigration speech that he made may well have affected him. There was a bit later on when Liz Saville-Roberts from Plaid Cymru had a go at him about the immigration, and the line was, is there anything that he believes in that lasts a week in Downing Street? And he turned around and said, well, there's one thing I do believe in, and that's that she talks rubbish, which everyone was a bit like, oh, it's a bit... It's not unparliamentary, but it's just little bit.
The word is wrong, isn't it? I remember once somebody calling somebody a moron. I think it was in a TV issue. Somebody called the Prime Minister a moron. And for some reason, I mean, it was Tony Blair, so they were factually correct, but that wasn't the point. It sounded really wrong to use that word.
Yeah.
Didn't sound right. I mean, you can say it in the pub, you know, he's this, that, or you say what you like in the pub.
Aye.
Saying something like that out loud, the word rubbish, it's not the most offensive word in the world, who cares? But it doesn't sound quite right.
It's not very statesmanlike. You know, he is the Prime Minister. He is the Prime Minister, and you think he should be above saying things like that to opposition politicians. So it was people winced at that moment. I thought, oh, there's definitely something annoying him right now. He's not very happy.
Yeah, I think he was just... I mean, coming into the House of Commons today with Enoch Powell's autobiography under his arm, I thought was a really weird... That was a telltale sign that he was distracted. He was getting to that whip hand comment, and he was just beginning to go, where can I go next with this? That, of course, has been crucial this week, hasn't it? I mean, I'm slightly surprised at this. I listened to that speech. Whilst I didn't believe that Starmer believes all of this. The Island of Strangers thing didn't jump out at me at thinking there was anything particularly mad or controversial about that, but everyone from Sadiq Khan to Plaid Cymru and others have almost lost their minds on this.
Yeah, I think it's the use of the word strangers. Enoch Powell used the word strangers in the Rivers of Blood speech, so people are drawing comparisons there, and the question is, did Number 10 know that they were giving a little nod to that speech? And if they didn't, then why didn't they? You would think it's a bit odd that they would throw that in.
Well, you would write, wouldn't you? You might write the speech and go Island of Strangers, and then somebody would have gone, can we just get that run through the system to make sure anyone else, when talking about immigration, has ever used the word strangers?
Yeah.
Because people have paid impressive money to do specifically that, right?
Well, quite absolutely.
They might find, oh yeah, Enoch Powell used it back in the day.
Yeah, and then they might well have thought twice about it. As a Labour PM echoing what Enoch Powell said might seem a little bit strange, which I guess it does. Yeah, I think it has been overblown a bit, though. This whole argument. I mean, there's been polling that showed that people, I think, generally agreed with what he said. Certainly, the majority of people did, and I think they understood what he was getting at. I think he was saying, if we don't take steps, if we don't have rules that everyone must follow, then it becomes a bit of a free-for-all. It is, I think that's what he was getting.
Yeah, and if people use the word social cohesion or cultural assimilation, nobody blinks at that. What's really the kind of same thing I think he was trying to...
It was. Maybe could have chosen his language a little bit better, and the Enoch Powell stuff was, let's say, unfortunate.
Not his best material.
No, certainly not. Certainly not. So maybe that's what kind of got under his skin, and that was what Liz Savile-Roberts was getting into his ribs about. So that was pretty unimpressive, I thought.
The other area that came up as well, Starmer condemning the Tories' opposition to net zero policies. I mean, it's interesting because they kind of kicked all the whole net zero thing off.
Yeah, it's funny.
And now they're in that weird place of going, no, you got it all wrong. But they kind of introduced it pretty much.
Well, it was Theresa May's big flagship legislation before she left office, was she got that on the statute book with very little debate, very little opposition. Yeah, we're going to go for net zero by 2050. Very little preparation, or actually, hang on a minute, do you think we can actually do this? Or how are we going to do it? I think she just wanted a legacy, and that was what. Yeah. But it now hangs around the Tories' neck like an albatross, because Labour can always say, well, hang on, this was your idea.
This is literally your policy.
I mean, you're Prime Minister who did this.
And of course, the Tories don't want to completely say they're against it all. They will try and say we're against bits of it, or the speed you're going, and the fact that Ed Miliband is the man making it happen. Blah blah.
They might put bills up as well.
Why
should ordinary people have to pay the price? All that type of stuff. And then Starmer comes back and says, well, that means you're against the jobs of the future. There's thousands of people already employed in the green industry, making wind turbines, etc. What is your message to them? And it just becomes a bit of a slanging match, really.
It's very odd, isn't it, when that kind of happens. I think I told you this before when I was in the press gallery. I remember seeing, I think it was David Davis when he was Shadow Home Secretary. That would be right, wouldn't it? And he had in the public gallery Shami Chakrabarti backing David Davis on this. It was a DNA database issue of some sort, and it was therefore it's an invasion of privacy. You can't compel people to do this. Jackie Smith was the Home Secretary. It was her bill or her questions. It was Home Office questions, I think. She was advocating that, no, we need this database. But half an hour ago in opposition, she literally had the same position that David Davis had at that point.
Yeah, I know.
It's that, isn't it? It's that really weird kind of moment.
Yeah, and I think people are, what feeds that, people are just so cynical now about politics. Hang on, you're now saying literally the opposite of what you said when you were in opposition. Keir Starmer's a classic example.
Well, we've had some really big examples under this government.
Oh God, yeah.
They've only been there 20 minutes.
Well, quite, exactly. And I was speaking to someone yesterday actually about, if you are a Labour MP or a Labour voter, what are you pointing to say, well, this is the difference. These are good Labour things that we've done, because they've had to swallow the crackdown on immigration, cutting international aid spending, winter fuel allowance, welfare cuts, all this type of stuff. It's tough stuff for a Labour government.
And half of those new faces, or half of some of the older faces as well, literally had photographs holding a placard saying, we will not cut your winter fuel allowance. I mean, they couldn't have been clear. Absolutely. There was no grey area on that one. So, I mean, they literally said it, and then they voted for it.
Yeah,
so.
Absolutely. And it is, and that's another albatross that's round the Labour's necks. I know from speaking to numerous Labour MPs that this is coming up on the doorstep.
all the
everywhere,
time.
just again and again.
And I don't think it's going to go away. Even 4 years away, I don't think it's going to go away.
It's not going to go away. It's going to dog them now. And that's why there are discussions going on in Number 10 as to whether or not they can do something to water it down. And not a full U-turn, but
change where you put the line.
Do something so that
from
more
like 11.5 grand up to something like 20 or something.
Yeah,
that
exactly.
makes a bit more sense.
Exactly.
Let's move to this story, because on Friday the assisted, what's called the terminally ill adult end of life bill appears. This is the Kim Ledbetter bill, third reading. We know what happened in Scotland yesterday. It got the initial kind of go ahead. This is a big divider, isn't it? We know the world of medicine is divided. GPs around about 50-50. Royal College of Physicians, gastroenterologists also saying the bill's not fit for purpose, lacks key protections. It's much like the sort of abortion debates. You generally either for or against, and it doesn't matter what amendments or caveats get thrown in. You don't usually change that entrenched position. But it's going to be interesting, isn't it, where this one goes?
Absolutely. I think some people have certainly changed their position since the first vote, the vote at second reading back in November when it was initially passed in the House of Commons. I think a lot of people voted for it then to say, right, well, we'll let it go to the next stage. We're not committed to voting for it in the final vote, but we'll give it a fair wind and let it be analysed and dissected. And then we'll make a proper decision later. And so it'll be interesting to see how many people, having listened to the debate since November, and it's been through a public bill committee, there have been amendments added to it, all this type of stuff, whether or not they're convinced that actually it is a robust piece of legislation, or, like those that you mentioned there a minute ago, still think, this is such a huge social change that it's just not fit for purpose.
And this one as well, Rupert Lowe is not going to be charged over alleged verbal threats. The CPS has said there is insufficient evidence for any kind of prosecution. This is over alleged threats of violence towards Zia Youssef and serious bullying complaints. Nothing to see here, said the CPS. Essentially, the CPS, of course, don't decide on guilt or not guilty. They just decide whether there's evidence to take it to a trial where you could decide guilty or not guilty, blah, blah, blah. I said at the beginning, as you heard, Kevin, you'd think of all people, all parties that were going to sort this one out over a pint, it would be these guys.
Absolutely.
Because they normally attack this kind of silly, squabbling nonsense. So it obviously got very bad over there at Reform HQ.
I think it had been bad for a long time, obviously. I think Rupert Lowe was pretty estranged from the rest of the MPs, and particularly from Nigel Farage. They did not see eye to eye. I think they had very different visions of where reform should be going. And it was, the timing of it was also strange and suspicious. Rupert Lowe gives this interview to the Daily Mail criticising Nigel Farage, and lo and behold, the very next day, he is kicked out the party over these allegations, which have been kicking around for a couple of months internally, and then lo and behold, he gets reported to the police. Now, obviously, he welcomes the fact that he's been not cleared, but you know what I mean. They're not taking any further action, and he has absolutely gone on the attack. I mean, he's called him a coward and a viper. Who should never be Prime Minister. I mean, it is really tough stuff. And he also says, ominously, I think, for Nigel Farage at the end, you'll be hearing more from me very soon. So I don't know what he's going to do next.
Was he in Parliament today?
I didn't see him. I didn't see him.
Where has he been sitting? I haven't.
Well, he has to sit on the opposition side, but obviously away from. He certainly won't be sitting anywhere near Nigel Farage. Put it that way. He's now absolutely persona non grata as far as reform are concerned. But it is interesting because I think internally amongst reform supporters, reform voters, Rupert Lowe does have support, who see him as more the sort of the true holder of the flame, whereas they think Nigel Farage might be backsliding a little bit. But that's only because he sees a big opportunity here, and he has to broaden reform's appeal. But a lot of people think Rupert Lowe is on the money.
Here's a curious one just to finish off. David Lammy has been accused of refusing to pay a taxi fare. Now, this wasn't David and his wife out, in London on a night out, going for a kebab, nipping in an Uber and then legging it. He was actually in France, and it was a £590 taxi fare. A 360-mile journey. I think it was a 6-hour journey or something.
Yeah, it was crazy.
From Italy to France. Him and his wife allegedly became aggressive upon arrival, according to the driver. Police reportedly identified Lammy through diplomatic passports and opened an investigation into the alleged commercial dispute. My first jump out of this, Kevin, was, hang on, David Lammy gets driven around in a bulletproof car with armed police protection. Like, he wouldn't be able to walk out the road round here. He wouldn't be allowed to. So what's he doing jumping in a cab in Italy?
Well, I guess it's because it was for personal use. He was off to go skiing, it would appear, with his wife. So there would, as you can imagine, if he got a chauffeur-driven car to do that, to go ski, that would be a scandal. Imagine
but
the headline.
Don't his protection officers have to be there all the time?
Well, you would think so. That is the strange. I mean, I remember when Margaret Beckett was Foreign Secretary and she loved caravan holidays.
That's right.
Her and her husband had to take the heavies with her.
They were in the caravan on the
they were in
M1.
a caravan behind. That's how that's how the level of protection
I remember that.
These people get. So it is a little bit strange. Now they also, the Foreign Office, have completely denied. We totally refute these allegations. The fare was paid in full. They're now counter-suing. Lammy and his wife are counter-suing because this guy made off with their skis. So they're accusing him of theft. And he obviously saying that
never
they didn't
nick Lammy's skis. I mean, come on.
What are you going to do with them?
Never nick a man's skis. I mean, you know, take his balaclava, but not his skis.
Exactly. It is an utterly bizarre story on so many levels, not least why have you taken a taxi?
Why have you taken a taxi?
Journey like that?
Where was the... when I read the story initially, there was no reference to what we're talking about here. There's about the protection officers. And, you know, they are there because there's only about 5 offices of state where you get protection.
Well, it becomes a bit of a target.
And Foreign Secretary is one of them, and it always has been. So it's... And as you rightly mentioned, Margaret Beckett and a couple of others I can think of, you know, you are substantially protected because you're in a potential position of... being a target.
Exactly. It is a very odd story. But as I say, they strongly deny that he jumped the fare, and they say that he nicked their ski equipment. But obviously the taxi driver is adamant that that's not what happened. So it's a bit of a...
And no evidence that there was a kebab left in the back of the cab or something.
And no one had been sick.
Got to pay €40 to clean that, mate. Sorry, Lambert, don't care who you are.
But he always ends up in controversy in some way.
He really does.
Shape or form, David Lammy. He's a bit of a trouble magnet, really.
The best video of Lammy is from a couple of years ago when he's standing on the street being interviewed, talking about, you know what I'm going to say, talking about you never see a police officer. You can't find a police officer. You never see one under the Tories, and right behind him is literally a police officer pounding the beat. It's an absolute beauty.
Brilliant.
Kevin, thank you. Kevin Scoville is off to get into his bulletproof limo back to Westminster. That'd be nice, wouldn't it?
A motorcade.
Indeed, a motorcade. Well, it's got another, give it his other phrase, the tube. There it is. That's Kevin Schofield with us on Talk. Thank you to him. More from you on the way. 0344 499 1000.
I put it in writing. And they basically replied and said, we can't remove him out of your theatre, but what we can do is we can cancel your surgery, we can move you to a different doctor with a different consultant at an unknown date. And I couldn't believe it. I said, well, you're prolonging my pain now because it needs to be done. It's like an emergency. With endometriosis, it's all over my bowels. It was a big operation. It's a joint case for the colorectal team. A lot of organisation went in. They just bypassed all that.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Brad in Cambridge says, wow, 6 hours in a car with David Lammy. That driver deserves a flipping medal, let alone his money. That's a very good point. He should be called to the palace, shouldn't he, by the king, and given a CBE for endurance or something like that. He managed it, mate. Mark says, reference overcrowding in prisons. The root cause is the huge number of people doing 2 weeks for minor infringements of whatever their probation terms were. If they had another punishment, such as no benefits for 2 weeks, then literally thousands of places would become available. It's a cracking point, and there's loads of examples. There's loads of people that just shouldn't be in jail. There's no purpose for it. It's not the most efficient kind of punishment. There's better way, and they're kind of stuck because they can't go, okay, so if it's all if it doesn't involve violence or some kind of abuse, sexual or other, physical, whatever it happens to be, or murder and things like that, then you don't go to jail. Well, that wouldn't work either, because a lot of non-violent crime can be horrific. You know, you can, I mean, imagine, you know, international fraudsters who've removed large sums of money from people's bank accounts and charities and stolen from hospices. And, you know, there's some pretty horrible people that you still have to put in jail. But you do think, really? I'm always compromised a bit. You know, the stuff on Twitter. I think that Lucy Connolly story comes up. Again, is it this week, to find out if parole is or some kind of appeal is possible? 31 months for writing some pretty diabolical stuff. I mean, let's be honest, this is a thicko at work on Twitter, all right? I've no truck in saying that. But the last time I looked, being a thicko or an idiot or inappropriate is not a criminal offence. Now, she pleaded guilty to incitement of racial hatred, I think it was. It was in that ballpark. So, yeah, I mean, a punishment of some sort. What was that, community? I would have thought she was also married to a, and still is, to a, he's now still a Tory councillor, I think, not a county councillor. I mean, someone like that, I would imagine the absolute humiliation of being nabbed and publicly shamed probably did the trick. I know courtrooms don't work like that. Well, we don't need to give you a punishment because you've been completely embarrassed out of your own socks, and you probably can't walk down the street again for the next 2 years. So I suppose, yeah, I'm not saying I know how to deal with it. I just don't think 31 months in jail. Yes, it was a horrible tweet. There was clear incitement in it. I doubt whether they would find a single person that read that tweet and then went, right, I'm going to the riots because Lucy told me to, with my box of Swan Vesta. That doesn't in any way dilute that it was serious and horrible. It's a horrible thing to say. What kind of adult writes that in a public space? But she did. But jail, 31 months? I don't think so. And yes, there are lots of cases like that. Every time I mention it, someone goes, yeah, well, the Just Stop Oil guys, the head of Just Stop Oil, got 5 years. I know there's something very, very stupid also, again, another ardent, thick as mince character, from hanging from a gantry on the M25 or whatever the heck it was, mass tailbacks, disruption, God knows what. You can clearly argue that is more severe. But I wouldn't put him in jail for 5 years either. That seems ridiculous. 5 years, really? Again, I don't know the answer. I'm not a lawyer, I'm not a politician. But 5 years in jail, I don't think is the answer. 31 months in jail, I don't think is the answer. These are all cases where you could go, we must do better on this one. This is Nick down in London on that assisted dying question. Nick, what are your thoughts? Good afternoon.
Yes, hello, Ed.
Hi.
It seems to me, whatever assisted dying thing we bring in, the process we bring in, will be flawed. It won't be a perfect process.
Yep.
And in some cases it will be wrongly used, and that will mean that a person who should live dies. And it seems, therefore, to me, pretty similar to the argument about a capital punishment.
Yeah.
Because the argument against that is it what is worse, having an innocent person die, or a guilty person not face the justice?
Yeah, that's the kind of classic pub moral dilemma, isn't it?
So it seems to me, if you're in favour of assisted dying, logically also you should be in favour of capital
punishment.
The same jeopardy exists on both, and I'm not sure that's being thought through. There will always be cases that's bound to be circumstances whereby it's been used and utilised and enforced almost on people who otherwise wouldn't have been ready for it.
Is there and I'm only just thinking aloud because you've sort of introduced the capital punishment thing, and you know there was a man yesterday that was released from jail after, you probably saw this, Nick, after 38 years, the longest miscarriage of justice. Absolutely horrendous. But of course, if that was today, because of DNA and all the rest of it, he wouldn't have been found guilty of that crime. It would have been pretty easy to establish that. There is an argument that says if there are I heard somebody put it this way, if you can provide 3 different types of DNA stroke forensic evidence, then you can convict, and then if there was capital punishment, you could then put somebody to death, which we couldn't do before, but we can do now. So would that eradicate that comparison you made? Because you could pretty much be guaranteed, well, these are the famous words, right? You could be guaranteed you've always got the right man, or have you?
Science is always a moving feast. Any scientist should say, science only knows what we know now. It can only be certain about what we know now.
Yeah.
Science can never be certain about what we might know tomorrow, next week, next year, and so on. We're always finding new things. And unless and until, my view, I'm in favour of capital
punishment. Yeah.
Ian. But unless you can be absolutely rock solid certain that this person carried out that act, I wouldn't. And if you're basing it on science, I think there's always scope for doubt.
Yeah.
The evidence of eyes, witnesses.
Yeah, it's true. Do you know what? I was once covering a court case, Nick, and I remember the judge, after a scientist had stood up and given a very compelling, authoritative and intelligent evidence on a case, and the judge reminded the jury that science is a version of events. And I thought, that's a great way to put it. It's important to remember, you get a big professor stand up in a courtroom with an impressive title and letters after his name. You tend to look at it as, well, these are the facts. And, of course, the judge was very quick to say, yeah, I mean, some of them might be, but it's another version of events. There'll be more evidence to hear later. That's a great way to look at it.
I agree. I'm no scientist, but
Are you not?
if it takes scientists to... if various scientists argue about things, then that makes the point arguable, which makes either scientist from either side neither are right. They can't be. It is you interpret. So
it's a good point. Well, I mean, this one is not going to be straightforward when it comes back to Parliament on Friday, and I do sense they're in for the long haul on this one. Nick, thank you very much indeed for your call. It is about that sort of certainty. Again, the Oregon example, apparently, I'm only quoting what we hear about that, has never experienced any controversy, really, around it, other than those that were fundamentally against it to start with. But Oregon is seen as this template that we're kind of copying in terms of they introduced assisted dying some decades ago, and it works very, very well. No one's ever wanted to change it back to what it was. Families and everyone concerned have clearly felt that this is working exactly as they said it would. No one has taken advantage of it. People haven't been forced into it. There's no, oh, my nan was a burden kind of, none of that stuff. But I don't know. You only want one of those cases, don't you, I suppose? On end-of-life care, Heather in Yorkshire says, having sat with my dad on end-of-life where he had no treatment or pain relief and was on a busy ward where he was mistakenly brought food, why did he have to go through that when there was no hope for him and he was basically left to die with no food or fluid? It's inhumane. My dogs had a better end to their lives when their time came, and it's always that comparison, isn't it? And I think I was thinking about this with my own parents, you know, today when we were discussing this, when we were thinking about talking about this, and thought, well, I don't know, would they have said? I don't think so. I don't think they would have opted for an end-of-life solution, partly because of the circumstances of how their lives ended, and it was pretty peaceful, but there was a horrible journey on the way. And we talked about it earlier, the scans and the diagnosis and the news itself, the fact you become sort of fairly disabled in the sense that you eventually can't do hardly anything for yourself, all of that notwithstanding, I don't know whether they would have opted for it. I think they might have been scared of it, maybe. They might have been scared of what it meant for the rest of us to do that, take that ultimate step. 0344 499 1000. Calls on that and all the other areas that we've been discussing here this afternoon. Lines are open, just gone 2:30. This is Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Chris in Ottershaw says, Rupert Lowe is piddling in the wind by calling Nigel Farage a coward. I can remember when he visited Scotland years ago, when he was intimidated by thugs, or when on 2 occasions he was drenched with milkshake and had concrete thrown at him. He's always been under threat, but never shied away. No coward is he, says Chris. I guess... I assume Rupert Lowe would say, well, politically, in terms of dealing what the party needs, he's a coward, rather than, running away from a fight. I don't know. I think that's probably what he meant. How does that pan out? Any views on that if you're a Reform UK voter? I don't think it's going to make an iota of difference. There are a few people that said, I'm not going to vote Reform now Rupert's gone. Of course that's going to happen, but I think their membership numbers continue to climb, and look, you know, one person never really, well, maybe one person does make a party sometimes. One person leaving a party may well cause a flurry of conversation, and among the chattering classes and us here, and I mean you guys listening and watching, we talk about it, we get animated about it. Ultimately, at the ballot box come an election, will it make a difference? Well, it didn't make a difference last week, did it? So I doubt it. 0344 499 1000. Now, a prison guard's throat was slashed by an inmate, and we're only just hearing this news, Woodhill prison in Milton Keynes, requiring stitches. This is according to the union representing prison officers. And of course, this is the latest in a series of attacks involving prisoners, including a near fatal assault at Franklin Prison by Manchester Arena terrorist Hashim Abedi, and the Southport killer as well, hurling scalding water over a guard at Belmarsh Prison. It comes as the government revealed plans to tackle the overcrowding crisis, potentially allowing prisoners to be released a third of their way through their sentences for good behaviour. So it used to sort of be halfway, didn't it? And then I think the last government sort of accelerated it to sort of 3/4. Now it's sort of gone the other way, a third of. Let's speak with Hamish Brown, MBE, retired Scotland Yard detective inspector, well-respected voice in the world of crime. Hamish, good afternoon to you, sir.
Good afternoon to you, Ian.
And I guess when it comes to, you know, who you release from prison, I suppose the question most people would ask in the pub is, well, it depends what they've done.
Yes, that's right. And there's got to be a sifting system to keep those locked up who are a danger to society. And it will depend on the sentence they received in the first place. And it might be a matter for the parole board, or it might be just built into legislation. They can be released at a certain time. I've done a lot of things in my time and, since leaving the police. Within the criminal justice system, coroners, antisocial behaviour, but I've also assisted the probation service in a number of ways, not as a probation officer, but I dealt with, part of my work was to deal with victims of crime, informing them of significant changes in their offender sentence. Yeah. Those are over 12 months for sexual offences and violent offences. A significant change, of course, will be the person's going to be released. Yeah. Now, I was the messenger, and they say, don't shoot the messenger, but I was shot, I can tell you. And people took this personally, and they say, well, how can they possibly be released now? Because they're only sentenced recently. But if they were in custody up to the point of sentence, that's going to come off. And at the end of the day, there has to be some sort of carrot, I think, for people to behave in prison, and if they keep their head down, behave themselves, they will be eligible for some sort of release. It might be on tagging, and if they misbehave during the tagging, then they're going to go straight back. So there is some supervision.
I've always thought the, tagging, I know tagging in itself has some controversy around it, not always perfect. In some cases, it's not worked at all. But, here we are in the 21st century in the digital world. I think things have come on leaps and bounds, and maybe that is an option. And you will remember, Hamish, back in the day when you were bombing around the back streets of London in a red Audi, catching the bad guys, there would have been people you nicked and thought, do you know what? I mean, they're wrong and they've done wrong. I don't think prison is necessarily the punishment for them, because sometimes there are other forms of punishment that would be more effective. Is that a conversation, uncomfortable as it might be for some? Is that a conversation we've got to have?
Yes, you're quite right to ask me that question, because I think with more service, maturity, I would accept towards the end of the service. I would go along with that. I support that entirely. But in the first instance, they get arrested, get locked up, and as far as you're concerned, that they should stay there. And you haven't thought about the wider circumstances. What is the point of sending someone down for a long time? There might be a public satisfaction. There might be a lesson to others. But if you go down this path, you're going to go inside. So yes, it can be quite a punitive measure. It can be destructive as well. So if someone's in prison and they were coming out at whatever time it is, to have more rehabilitation, and the prison staff will hear the pressures they're under. The probation staff are under different pressures, but still quite a lot themselves.
Yeah.
But you should never set anyone up to fail, because I can assure you they will be back on recall. And we saw precisely that with this early release scheme, which came out, well, just a few months ago. And goodness knows how many reoffended or didn't keep their conditions, and they were back inside. So it's a pretty useless exercise unless it is properly and positively managed.
Yeah, and the shortcut answer to overcrowding is usually, well, build more prisons. There is one that's just opened actually, but even that's not going to even touch the sides in terms of the numbers we've got. So we either go big on building more prisons, Hamish, or we do have this rethink that we were just talking about in terms of what kind of crimes you were sent to prison for. If you're a murderer, a horrendous, violent, brutal, sexual attacker of some kind, armed robber, all of that stuff, it's obvious. There could be other areas, non-violent protesters, for example, whether they're online or off. That would be an area I think people would look at and go, should we really be sending those people to jail? I mean, they're a pain in the backside. They're not necessarily somebody I want to break bread with or have a pint, but, a couple of years in Strangeways seems a bit over the top for this.
Yes, the people who do the most serious crimes should and deserve to go to prison for a very long time, and they can stay there as far as I'm concerned. I'm talking about the rapists and the murderers and all the other sort of terrorists, for that matter, armed robbers, the people who cause terror to society. But I've sat in Crown Courts and Magistrates' Courts, and the case and sentencing in it is a very big responsibility for the courts. And very often, almost in every case, in fact, they'll ask probation for a pre-sentence report, a PSR is known as. This is a very comprehensive report, and they will weigh it up. And the probation officer, the report writer, will recommend whether it should be custody or not. This does not compel the judge or the magistrate to go down that path, but very often, particularly in the magistrates' court, which arguably that they deal with the less serious cases, they're always looking for an option, a sensible option, not to send to custody. The difficulty is, if you give someone a non-custodial sentence for, you say, demonstrations or whatever it is, and they keep coming back and they have no respect for the court at all, then I'm afraid they've signed their own warrant to go back to prison, and they deserve to be there because they haven't taken that chance.
And of course, just to compound the miserable story of what's going on in our prisons, overcrowding and the like, we know that attacks on officers, prison officers, are increasing. The Sun previously revealed that officers working in prisons were attacked almost 30 times a day. You know what it's like being a copper. That's, it has an equal problem that goes with it. A record 10,496 assaults were logged in the year to September 2024. That's up from 8,500 in the previous 12 months. So are prisoners getting more brazen, do you think? Are they thinking, well, there's not enough of these guys out there, in the same way that shoplifters seem to get away with it because there's not enough police to go around? Maybe those on C Wing are having a pop at prison guards because they think there's not enough prison officers to go round.
I think there's a general contempt, not only in society, but in prisons as well, a contempt against authority. And of course, the prison officers are in the firing line entirely on that. So it's a difficult call for the prison officers. People who are serving sentences with no hope, how on earth do you manage those? And there's very little you can take away from them in the form of privileges. Certainly, early release will be out the question. I think the target hardening, the more support for the officers. There's talk of tasers, well, I'll leave that to the Prison Officers Association to make their case. But any protection the prison officers need and want will certainly get my full support, and I hope society across the board will as well.
I hope so too. Hamish, thank you for your time. Always an expert view. Hamish Brown, MBE, retired Scotland Yard Detective Inspector, with us on the programme. Thank you to him. People have just got, and a couple of the cases we've highlighted recently, particularly the Southport killer and the man who was in part the Manchester Arena terrorist, those two, where you've got nothing to lose. You're never coming out. Everybody hates you. Your life's, clearly finished. You're just going to sit looking at, what does it matter? If for no other reason, for kicks and japes, you might want to go in for an attack. You don't care. You really don't care. We'll have some comment on that as well. 0344 499 1000. What are the offences that we shouldn't send people to jail for? There's a good question there. I mentioned non-violent protest, whether that's online or whether it's in the street, seems to be a pretty obvious one, yeah? You can do something with those people if they've been a pain in the backside. Tags and God knows what else, bit of community service, some good old public humiliation involved in all of that, I guess. Comments on that as well. We'll go back to assisted dying 2. Prisons are overcrowded. Lines are open. 0344 499 1000. And time now, just gone 2:45, to find out how you could be in with a chance of winning a weekend away in Munich. You're aware of this, a beautiful weekend for 2 at the end of May to watch the biggest game in European football. It is the Champions League final. It hardly gets any bigger than that. And thanks to our colleagues at talkSPORT, we're also giving you £5,000 in your pocket, £5,000 to spend however you want. Have a listen to the details.
Win a once-in-a-lifetime trip to watch the Champions League final live. Go to talksport.com/win for your chance to embark on the ultimate odyssey of football ecstasy. With 2 tickets to the Champions League final live at the iconic Munich Football Arena, Germany, including flights, accommodation, and an uber-massive £5,000 in your hand. How about that? Enter online now at talksport.com/win. Terms and conditions apply. Achtung, baby.
18 plus, UK, excluding Northern Ireland. For a chance to win all of that, simply text the word football to 83338 by the 16th of May at 11 p.m. Text costs £2 plus 1 standard network rate message. You must have the bill payer's permission, or send your name and number by post to Champions League final competition, PO Box 3190, Colchester CO2 8GP, to arrive by 5 p.m. on the 21st of May. This is a TalkSport limited competition run on TalkSport Talk and Virgin Radio UK stations. Full terms and conditions at talksport.com.
I put it in writing, and they basically replied and said, we can't remove him out of your theatre, but what we can do is we can cancel your surgery, we can move you to a different doctor with a different consultant at an unknown date. And I couldn't believe it. I said, well, you're prolonging my pain now because it needs to be done. It's like an emergency. With endometriosis, it's all over my bowels. It was a big operation. It was a joint case with the colorectal team. A lot of organisation went in. They just bypassed all that.
Across across the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
It is Talk. We'll talk to Nigel in just a second. Before we do, Voice of Doom, Day 8. It's the mystery voice bit. We haven't got a winner for 8 days. You've got one simple task, and that's to try and identify who is this.
This is so interesting.
It's not Matt Hancock. I'm going to say it every day. It's not Matt Hancock. I know it sounds a lot like Matt Hancock, but it's not Matt Hancock. Here it is again.
This is so interesting.
Who is that? You're looking for... All right, I'll tell you. You're looking for, when I say a member of Parliament, past or present. Past or present. The Voice of Doom is always politically kind of connected. It could be an MP, it could be someone who's in some way part of the political world, but I'll tell you that as the first clue on Day 8. It is a politician, but I'm not going to tell you whether they're past or present. Here's the voice again.
This is so interesting.
Don't phone in, but you can message in if you think you know. 87222. Who is that? And hopefully, if we get an answer, we'll tell you after the news. Back to your calls. Let's talk to Nigel, who's in Portsmouth. How you doing, Nigel?
All good, Ian. All good, Ian.
Good,
really interesting. Yeah. Some great contributions to this. Mine is kind of a bit of the opposing view, if that makes sense.
OK, this is on assisted dying, yeah?
It is, yeah. In 91, early 91, my mum had a brain hemorrhage, and she was in a coma for about 6 months altogether. And a couple of months in, they said to us, you know, she's not going to live, basically. Under one GP said, well, not GP, one of the doctors said to me, there's no point coming to see her anymore. You just really, the word to use was, you're tormenting yourself because she's never going to wake up. That's it. She's just going to lie here. And it was in the days, I don't think they would use the terminology now, where he said she's just a vegetable. That's it. Wow. Had assistant dying been on the cards then, I would have easily been able to persuade a judge, you know, like all the men were all saying, yeah, that's it. She's curtains for her, basically. Yeah. Anyway, then one day she woke up. She couldn't speak. She couldn't move or anything like that. Wow. We were really lucky. There was actually an anaesthetist. She was in Hinchinbrook in Huntingdon. He came over from Adam Brooks, and he was there seeing someone else, and he popped in, and he said, I've been looking at the records. I think she had an aneurysm behind her eyes. It was really difficult to get to. And he said, you know what they're telling you is right. The chances of her recovering are nil, but I think we can improve her condition by operating. It is 50-50. You know, she'll either get a little bit better or she'll die in surgery. And 22 hours in surgery, 2 teams. She made a full recovery, went back to work, driving around. Yeah, made a full recovery. So, yes, every medical opinion was
there is no chance.
There's no chance. There's no chance.
She made a full recovery. Did she have any... I know this is a really obvious, slightly kind of geeky question, but did she have any recollection of being in a coma?
What she had was she had recollections of conversations that I used to go in. I was living in London already, and I used to go and see her every weekend and just sit there, read the newspaper out to her, just tell her what I'd done that week kind of thing. And randomly, she would remember some of the things that I had told her. And basically, she later died of something completely different. But the difference is those extra or 8 or 9 years she had, it meant that she saw me get married, saw the birth of first grandchild, all those kind of things, which were kind of like milestone stuff. So, yeah, you know what? I know that the law now is slightly different, you know, or what they're looking to propose. And my dad's 92. He gets muddled, but he still always asking what the football score is, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. I
could persuade him today, listen, Dad, you're a burden, let's end it. He would say, yeah, okay. Honestly, he would say, okay.
Wow. But of course, under this legislation, that wouldn't be allowed because he wouldn't get to the stage where because he's not terminally ill, right?
Well, we're all terminally ill, aren't we?
Well, yeah, literally, we are all going to die. That's a very good way to put it. Yeah, I don't know if that would wash with the judge.
Okay, he's got quite a few ailments, and realistically, another 5 years. If he makes another 5 years, like anyone at 92, the
well, 100%, yeah, of course. But what worries people about this legislation, Nigel, is that not what it necessarily might do today, it's what it might look like in 5 or 10 years' time. Will they start going, OK, you don't have to be terminally ill, you just have to be quite ill or quite old, and that's where you get into that tricky area.
I mean, it is one of those things, you know, one of the things we hear a lot about are kind of bed blockers and that kind of stuff. And that's been my dad for the last 6 months. He hasn't got money to pay for care.
Yeah.
He lives in a council bungalow. And for the last 6 months, he's bounced around into hospital for a month, go home, 4 carers coming to him, back to hospital, go to a care home, back to hospital, back to a care home. He's been in 6 care homes. So I think he's settled now. But some of the care homes I've been to see him in, you know, I do understand some of the people just sitting there staring at the wall.
Yeah, I've been to...
So I do get that. I do get it. But using my mum as an example, I think this is a very, very slippery slope.
Nigel, wow, what a call. What a powerful story as well. Nigel in Portsmouth. Let's take a gear change here. Norman's in Dartford. This is about Rupert Lowe, Norman. What have you got? We haven't got long, but I'm sure you can do it. What are you thinking?
Well, with Rupert Lowe, if you look at his background, he was a leader. He's a leader of a multi-million-pound company.
Yeah.
He was the owner of Southampton Football Club. He is never going to want to play second fiddle to anybody.
True.
And then he got praised to the hilt by Elon Musk. That went to his head a little bit. And I noticed he was on the airwaves quite a bit. And he was trying to set the reform agenda. And that's where it all went wrong.
So the fact, yeah, because he got endorsed by Elon Musk before he left the party, of course, didn't he?
Yeah, of course he did. Yeah.
Yeah.
But that's when he got.
Yeah. So somebody like Rupert Lowe could never be anything but the man in charge in Rupert Lowe's world.
No, that's exactly right.
Yeah.
But what I will say, without Nigel Farage and reform, no one had ever heard of Rupert Lowe.
That's
Never
true.
mind listen to what he's got to say.
Yeah. That is true. That's true. But I mean, you could argue that about any party, couldn't you?
Well,
at
yeah,
some point?
but I hate to dent his ego, but no one will ever listen to him again.
Well, I mean, there's a lot of Rupert Lowe supporters. He could do well as an independent still.
Well, how do you mean? There's a lot of them.
Well, I'm not going to give you a number, but there was certainly a momentum of protest when he left the party and this happened, and you know there was enough people to form a reasonable description of disquiet who was saying, I'm not going to vote reform anymore. By the way, I agree. I don't think it'll make the world a difference. And I think he'd be better to go as an independent than he would to start another party. Well,
the council elections proved that.
Well, indeed. There it is. There is the evidence you needed. Norman, great call. Thank you very much indeed for that, Norman in Dartford. You want to tag on the back of that call? Lines are open too. We have, on the other side of the news, hopefully, we can give you the answer to the voice of doom. Will we have a winner? Have a listen to the voice again.
This is so interesting.
Who is that? Any thoughts? 87222. Don't phone, but you can message on 87222. Before all of that, let's get the latest news headlines on Talk at 3.
across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Coming up at 3 minutes after 3 o'clock, welcome back to the home of Common Sense. We are discussing, among other things, Rupert Lowe accusing Nigel Farage of being a bit of a coward and a viper, says he's trying to weaponise the criminal justice system against him after the Crown Prosecution Service confirmed that no charges would be brought against him for allegedly threatening the party chairman. That's how it all started, turned into a heck of a mess. Where does Rupert Lowe go next? Well, he's an independent, still a big voice in his own world, but not within a party as such. More comment on that. Also, the boss of British Gas has cast doubt on Labour's pledge to cut household energy bills, saying net zero won't bring electricity prices down. What does that actually mean in reality? Is it as simple as that? Because I think the mood music from Ed Miliband and co is that, yeah, this is the journey. This is the journey to bring your bills down. Details in a few moments. And BBC Director General Tim Davies says the broadcaster must restore public trust, with new steps to be announced soon as pressure mounts over Gary Lineker's controversial pro-Palestinian post featuring a rat emoji, which of course is very intrinsically linked to anti-Semitism, something apparently Gary didn't know about. Well, if you don't know about it, mate, don't join in with grown-up conversations. 0344 499 1000 is where you will find us. This is Talk, the home of common sense. And just before we move any further, the voice of doom. Have we got a winner? This is the voice you were trying to identify.
This is so interesting.
Jacob Rees-Mogg. It is not. I don't think that sounds anything like... Can we have another listen?
This is so interesting.
That's never... There's no resemblance to Jacob Rees-Mogg, but somebody every day guesses Jacob Rees-Mogg. It is not. Michael Heseltine. No. William Hague. Doesn't sound like him either. Nigel Farage. It doesn't sound like him either, does it? Can we listen again?
This is so interesting.
That could never be Farage. Chris Whitty, no. James Price, no. Yet again, we have no correct answer. You're looking for a politician, past or present. More clues will follow. It rolls over for day 9 tomorrow. This is the longest run we've had of no one guessing these things. We've been through a whole series of really quite tricky voices that have been guessed on like that, day 1. The last couple, no, these are eluding the nation. Tomorrow, 2:45, the voice of doom is back. Now, the boss of British Gas has cast doubt on Labour's promise to cut energy bills, saying net zero will not lower electricity prices. Chris O'Shea, the CEO, has warned that emerging technologies like floating wind and tidal power are far more expensive than gas or solar. This somewhat contradicts Ed Miliband's pledge to save households £300 a year by 2030. Let's speak with Andrew Montford, Director at Net Zero Watch. Andrew, good afternoon to you. I mean, for me, that's where this curious story really starts. They made an awful lot of this £300 a year saving during the election, and then it kind of disappeared about halfway through the campaign, didn't it? They quietly dropped it because somebody clearly had a word and said, you can't achieve this.
Yeah, absolutely. The thing is, he said he was going to reduce bills by £300, but actually in the, 9 months or so since they were elected, bills have actually gone up by getting on for £300. Yeah. So it's quite clear that the promise was misleading. It's true. Chris O'Shea from Centrica is quite right. Bills aren't going to come down. If you actually look at the breakdown of what goes into a bill, almost every element of it will go up in future. We can see that subsidies are going to go up in future. The Office for Budget Responsibility says they'll keep increasing at least out to 2030. The cost of balancing the grid's going to go up. Carbon taxes are going to go up because we're going to be pushed into the EU emissions trading scheme where prices are rather higher. I could go on and on and on about this. Almost every element will increase. The only one that might come down, actually, strangely, is the gas price, which Ed Miliband keeps saying is the problem. We're expecting a lot of new flows of liquefied natural gas in a couple of years' time. That will bring prices down. So, people should expect prices to keep going up. We are really in a very, very bad situation here.
What is the truth then on this whole area of green subsidies or the green taxes, whatever, however it's phrased, are responsible for bills being high? There was a bit of a, and I'm sure you're aware of this situation, Andrew, there was a moment on the Robert Peston programme on ITV where they sort of slightly did a gotcha moment on Kemi Badenoch saying no, all this nonsense about green taxes, and then somebody showed a chart, and I think that's widely now been dismantled as not being quite economical with the truth, certainly by some. So what is the reality of this? Because those on the the sort of Dale Vinces and the like environmentalists say no, it's nothing to do with the green stuff, it's to do with the cost of gas.
Yeah, it absolutely isn't to do with the cost of gas. The Peston show was pretty appalling. What they did was essentially there's a lot of things that I think they included within wholesale prices, which wholesale prices are, everybody agrees, are affected by gas. But there are other things in there, such as carbon taxes and also Ofgem, for reasons that I'm not entirely clear, also include some of the renewable subsidies. So once you've stripped all those things out, the bit that's actually affected by gas has really only increased a little bit. You can see the big increases over the last 10 years, the long-term increase, are subsidies, carbon taxes, and the cost of dealing with the intermittency of renewables. And as I said before, those things are going to keep increasing. So the situation's going to get worse.
Well, there is a way to make your life easier, apparently. Homeowners who ditch their gas boilers for a heat pump could pay back the cost of the insulation through a salary sacrifice scheme. I nearly fell off my chair when I read this one. Under plans being considered by Ed Miliband. Now, I get it. You might do a salary sacrifice thing if you want to pay a medical bill for someone whose leg has fallen off in Kuala Lumpur in an unfortunate accident. I get that. Pay by instalments. I don't know how many people are going to be running for the heat pump installation knowing that they're going to have it taken out of their salary. How desperate is Ed Miliband on this?
Yeah, this is what Ed Miliband's doing left, right and centre. Instead of actually dealing with the high costs of the system and stuff like heat pumps and EVs, he's trying to hide them, to sort of change who pays for them or just hide it in some other ways. This is just one example of that. The fact of the matter is that a heat pump will, for most people, not save them any money, and it certainly won't pay back the huge cost of installing a heat pump. He's trying, he can't deal with that. That's not going to change. So he's just trying to trick people. And I think, as long as we keep saying that he's trying to trick people, people will see through it and they'll just not listen to him.
What is this obsession, this evangelical obsession with heat pumps as well? I mean, I mentioned Dale Vince a second ago. Even Dale Vince is against heat pumps, for goodness sake. But Ed Miliband is wedded to this idea. It doesn't matter what. It's like someone's hypnotised him or something. Darren Brown has been on the case, so he can't get it out his head for some reason. He's got to have more heat pumps.
Well, of course, heat pumps run on electricity, and electricity, in theory, can be made zero carbon. So he wants people to have heat pumps, but they're more expensive to run, and they don't work very well in cold weather when you actually want them. It's a bit of a disaster. But this is true of so many things. It's true of EVs as well. People don't actually really want them. They're more expensive. So he tries to hide those facts from people by subsidizing things and forcing people to buy EVs rather than petrol cars, it goes on and on and on, and eventually the crows will come home to roost, and people will see the truth. But for a while, I think Ed Miliband is going to keep trying to fool people.
But what you're forgetting, Andrew, and this is the difference between you and Ed Miliband, is that Ed cares and he wants to save the planet. He's going to do something about the burning peat bogs of Borneo and that lesser spotted toad of Mexico, whereas you're just going to sit talking about it. Ed's the man to follow, surely.
I think following Ed, a man who is determinedly trying to drive the country off a cliff, it's probably a very foolish thing to do. Yeah, I mean, Ed Miliband is a fanatic, isn't he? And he doesn't actually really care about the pain that this is causing people. He will do this whatever, and you know, he will. I think he wants to leave his mark on history as well. Probably, you know, he wants to be seen in the history books as the man who delivered net zero because he thinks net zero is great. I think the history books actually will tell a very different story. They'll tell the story that, you know, he was the man who finally crashed the economy by. Yes. You know, I mean, we are, I think, inevitably going to lose what is left of our manufacturing by the time we get rid of this government, because, you know, electricity prices are going to soar.
Well, he's kind of cosplaying Al Gore, isn't he, from about 25 years ago, and you know what happened to him. So, you know, it's not as if there's not precedent for where this journey can take you.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Gore did very well out of it, of course, didn't he? You know, he made loads and loads of money out of being an eco nutter. I don't know whether Ed Miliband is doing quite so well, but yeah, there are, shall we say, side benefits to being a leading eco warrior.
There it is. Listen, Andrew, always great to talk. Thank you, Andrew Montford, director of Net Zero Watch. I'm going to ask this question. I've asked loads of times before, but I'm genuinely fascinated when we speak to people who, because some technology obviously works, you know, if the wind was turning and you could store it and solar panels, you know, blah, 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 then I don't know a single person that wouldn't go, yeah, bring it on. That's got to be better than dirty old oil if you can make it nice and clean, and it's essentially free because it's provided by the weather. And obviously you've got the infrastructure, you've got to pay for installation and stuff, but once you've got beyond that, this is free lecky. It's free everything. Your energy is free because it's provided by the wind and the sun. And it's clean. No one's going to ever get their head polluted because it was a bit windy, right? I mean, this is good stuff. That isn't the question, though. We all agree, everyone on the planet would go, I would opt for that every day of the week. If we could make that thing work and it's not going to bankrupt the nation or my own bank balance, then let's bring it on. So I'm bound to ask that question of you. If you've got, firstly, the heat pump thing. That's the one that really gets me. And I mentioned, you know, various environmentalists. I mentioned Dale, Vince, who doesn't think this is the best technology. It certainly doesn't work in every home. You couldn't install them in every home. There is a massive push. If Ed Miliband is thinking about coming up with salary sacrifice schemes so you can pay for your heat pump, a version of heating your home that is not as efficient as what you currently have, that's going to be a hard sell. But if you have one and love it and it works a treat, I'm all ears at this end. And is it cheaper for you to run? Are your bills noticeably cheaper as a result of your heat pump? 0344 499 1000. And along with that, naturally, the solar panels. What are your bills looking like? I keep hearing people who go, yeah, I had solar panels put on the roof about 10, 15 years ago. I mean, these things have been around for decades now, just not talked about very often. And I pay nothing for my electricity. Literally nothing. In fact, I get money back because I'm selling it back to the company. Wouldn't we all give that a go if we could get the panels on our roof and could afford the installation? 0344 499 1000. Let's go back to your calls. Paul is in Newport. On that question we began with, Paul, about assisted dying, what are your thoughts? Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Ian. Good to speak to you again.
You too.
My own opinion, my friend, it's a matter of time before it goes through. Anyone who's had to watch a loved one have the most awful death will vote for it. Now, bear in mind, okay, that when you see the adverts on the telly and it says 1 in 2 of us, every other one of us is going to get cancer.
Yeah.
So that means the other 50% are going to watch. I'm not saying everyone who gets cancer has a harrowing death, but it means the number of people, as we get older, the number of people who witness, and it's absolutely awful. It rips the heart from you to watch your loved one have the most awful death.
Yeah.
The more people that go through it, the more people will just say, hey, and that whole thing, you hear people say all the time, I wouldn't let my dog die like that. and I really, really wouldn't. It's the most harrowing thing you could ever see.
What about the issues, though, Paul? I mean, you're aware of them because we've been talking about them. But all the reservations where people have, it might look like that today, but this bill could, the law could turn into something slightly more disturbing down the years, down the track. People just, taking a tablet.
But isn't it all the way, Ian? Isn't it? It's always the way that we don't do the right thing for the wrong reason because of the 1% of the 1%. We always, I refer to it as the tail wagging the dog,
Sure.
So why are you going to let 1,000 or 1,000,000 people suffer the most awful death?
Because of what 300 people think, yeah.
Yeah. Honestly, I pray, I'm not a religious man, but I pray that the listening world never has to go through it because it's absolutely gut-wrenching.
Yeah, it's not something that is nice to experience.
You really don't want it.
Yeah, spot on, Paul. Thank you for that. This one, on that very point, Norman says, your conversation on assisted dying is relevant. I don't think it works. Many years ago, my father was very sick with lung cancer and was in a hospice in Inverness because he was given 3 months to live. But I was working in London, travelling up every weekend to see the old boy, and he picked up, and I was allowed to take him home. This lasted 3 years at the time. After my fight, I went straight to the hospice because they told me he was dying after my flight. I went straight to the hospice and there was a huge commotion of staff, ushered me to Dad's bedroom, and a priest was delivering the last rites, which had reinvigorated my father, who happens to be the most anti-religious person ever. Anyway, when it was all sorted out, they let me take him home and he held on for another 3 months. Some of this stuff, there's a kind of sort of dark humour in some of them. And this is sort of sitcom territory, isn't it? When you consider it, and we say goodbye to you. Hang on, mate. No. What age isn't me yet? It could be months, could be years in some cases. Brad in Cambridge says, and I've heard these stories many times, my mother was in hospital dying from cancer and in excruciating pain. She was scared and it was pitiful. We maintain to this day that the doctor gave her a terminal dose of morphine to help her on her way, and we are forever grateful. I know that those stories will never get confirmed by a doctor who would find themselves in a courtroom and then arguably a prison cell. But I do, literally a friend of mine believes exactly that the nurse just gave a little more because it's a judgment call. How much do you got? I gave this amount. And sometimes that amount might be within the law in a technicality, but not advice. Whatever it is, it's not that unusual an anecdote to hear, but it is one that I think people like Brad would say was absolutely the right thing to do. Thank you, Brad, for that. Back to you shortly. 0344 499 1000. Lines are open. This is Talk.
it's in writing, and they basically replied and said, we can't remove them out of your theatre, but what we can do is we can cancel your surgery, we can move you to a different doctor with a different consultant at an unknown date. And I couldn't believe it. I said, well, you're prolonging my pain now because it needs to be done. It's like an emergency. With endometriosis, it's all over my bowels. It was a big operation. It's a joint case with the colorectal team. A lot of organisation went in. They just bypassed all that.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
It is indeed Talk. 0344 499 1000. Let's go back to your calls. We've got a range of stuff going on here. Ruth in Anglesey, on the solar panels point, Ruth, good afternoon to you.
Hello, good afternoon, Ian.
Nice to have you with us.
Thank you. Thanks for taking my call.
That's a pleasure. What are you thinking?
Yeah, I just wanted to phone you because here in Anglesey, we've already got solar panels in the north of the island here. A few projects. We've got wind farm. We've got the nuclear power station that was decommissioned.
Wow, you're never going to run out of energy around in Anglesey way, are you? Really? Goodness me.
Yeah, exactly. And now they want to put 3,700 acres. It is this one that's going to do. The visual impact is 1,700 football pitches. Yeah.
Of solar panels.
Yeah, solar panels. So,
I mean, Anglesey is a prime location for the wind, right? I mean, that's there's no doubt about that. What about the sun?
The only thing we have here really is tourism and farming. So how's the farming going with all these panels, and how's the tourism going when you're looking at sea of black plastic?
Oh, who doesn't want to fly over from America and see the big Anglesey solar panel fields?
It's ridiculous. And recently there was a storm in the winter, Ian, and one solar panel farm that's already in place was just desecrated with hundreds and hundreds of panels just ripped off with the Anglesey wind.
Wow.
So, it's just ridiculous. So that's my gripe.
And so the nuclear plant is closed down. That doesn't provide anything.
Yeah, that's decommissioned. But the thing is, the footprint's still there.
Yeah.
So they can do small modular. People in Anglesey now, we're used to that. It's been there since the 1960s.
Yep.
And I think a lot of people would rather they just did small modular on the same footprint where that is, and not plaster all our countryside with black plastic.
Yeah, which is at the moment, it's still. I know solar panels have been around for longer than people think they have, but nonetheless, on this kind of scale, they haven't. Right? We never used to be able to drive anywhere and see a field full of them.
Exactly. And I've read a lot about it, the change in the water courses, the runoff from the panels, the change in migration patterns of insects and animals. And, it's all round the top of the lake here. Well, what's the runoff there? Does the lithium leak? Or, there's a lot of concerns.
Sure.
And we just feel as though it's going to have Miliband. So the decision isn't even here,
Yeah.
It's going to, because it's such a big planning decision, it's going to have Miliband. Well, he's going to do it, isn't he?
Well, of course he is. He's not going to say no to it. I mean, it's like saying no to chips, right? I mean, you just don't do it.
Exactly.
There it is.
So I wanted to phone and register that a lot of people here are very, very unhappy.
It is the voice of common sense from Anglesey. Ruth, I'm grateful for your call. Thank you very much indeed for that. There it is. I mean, there is certainly when when mini nuclear could be re-fired up from what Ruth was saying, and do it that way, which might be more guaranteed than anything, and also, pretty clean stuff as well. Bob in Bristol. Bob, what have you got for us? Afternoon. You're a heat pump man, is that right?
Well, yeah, I am a heat pump man.
You don't introduce yourself to people, do you? Hi, I'm Bob, the heat pump man.
Man, yeah. Well, I used to be a heating engineer many years ago.
Okay.
But I knew nothing about. I knew nothing about heat pumps, that side of it. So I had to do my homework. But 15 years ago, quickly, the government was doing a thing on solar panels.
Yep.
So I took up some money. They were giving, I don't know, about 30 or 40p a kilowatt for everything you produced. Right. Well, that's still in place now for 25 years, index linked. Right.
Yep.
So then I decided that I could get my money back in 5 years. So I done that. I put solar panels on the roof, and it took me 6 years to get my money back. right? But now I produced 44,000 kilowatt hours of electricity.
That's a lot of kilowatt hours, right?
That's right.
So you don't really pay a bill?
No. Oh, hang on a minute. I've got a heat pump now, which I do pay a bill, but I pay around about £300 a year.
Blimey.
For electric. But I got to go on and say other things because I've got a heat pump now. But the next thing I done, Indra in Hereford, we're doing a bi-directional charger. So it goes from your vehicle to your home.
Mm-hmm.
So I decided that I'd go electric vehicle, and I bought a cheap Nissan Leaf, which is I think one of the only cars that lets the electric go both ways.
Okay.
So I bought an old cheap. It's got I think it's got 30 kilowatts in it. So that runs my house. Because I can leave that and just leave it plugged in.
Right. And what's left in the car will go back to the house?
That's right. So the solar panels during the day, which I produce about 20 kilowatts in the summer, because I've only got 4 kilowatt of power. So that goes, like now, my battery in my car's full. Now, obviously, that doesn't happen in the winter months.
No,
so
but
I do have to pay.
But overall, Bob, you're still quids in on the whole deal.
Yeah, but as I say to everybody, the heat pump. Going back to the heat pumps.
Yes.
Look, everybody's got to do a lot of homework. Make sure your EPC is right up to date. It means that you need at least A or A+. Right? You definitely need that. In my case, I live in a bungalow, a detached bungalow, 1970s. It already had cavity wall.
Right.
I had double glazing. The only thing it didn't have was enough loft insulation.
Okay.
So what I done, I put it in myself actually. I paid about 120 quid and done that, then got an EPC and was rated A. And then I started to look around for a reputable, somebody that's been in the trade for years that knows all about heat pumps.
Yeah. Well, that's the only way to do it, right?
Right. So I contacted them. The government then was giving a lot. It was going to cost me £2,000 for a new boiler, gas boiler, but it cost me £3,500 altogether for the heat pump. So it cost me an extra £1,100 because of the grant I had from the government. So,
I mean, you should be. So you've got double glazing, your loft is insulated, you've got cavity wall, a heat pump, solar panels, and an electric car. Have you got a windmill?
No, it's not worth it.
You're not very good at this, are you?
The point being is that you've got to use the government, what the government's doing.
Yeah, but I don't think those incentives have kind of disappeared a bit, haven't they?
Well,
some of those sweeteners.
Some of them, yeah, some of them have.
Yeah.
But from my solar panels, I earn £2,500 a year for what because it was index linked. So for every kilowatt that I produce now, I'm getting about 70p.
See, that's all right, isn't it? So when all is said and done, you're in profit for heating your house and running your car.
Oh God, yeah. I'm miles in profit.
That's a beautiful thing. You should go on holiday with Chris Packham. Listen, Bob, that's a brilliant call. It's very insightful as well. You do rather kind of prove what I was saying a little earlier, that if you can do all this stuff and you've got the ability to install it and the finances to make it happen. I know there were some, incentives and government grants and whatnot back in the day. I'm not sure they're as generous, if they are there at all these days, but nobody would dispute that that could work. What the argument of that I think makes most people grumble over net zero is the fact that there is a sort of a speed to this that is unrequired, and a kicking yourself in the shins as a country in order to reach this goal, which there is a debate about it. Nobody suggests it's not great if you got there, brilliant, but the mechanisms that we are utilising and the surrender that we are having to utilise to get there seem to many unworkable. It seems like a crock of nonsense. That, you know, great if you can do what Bob did, because he ain't paying a bean to do all of that, and in fact they're paying him to the tune of $2.5K a year. Again, I don't think that scheme is quite as generous as it once was, because I think it was set in stone for 10 or 15 years or something. So yeah, but if you could do that, who wouldn't do that? Brilliant. Good luck with putting solar panels on my roof. That you wouldn't be able to get them on there. For a start, it's not quite, it's too wibbly, you know, what's the word? Hickledy-pickledy, you know, it's all over the place. You might get one panel on there. I don't think you'd get much out of one panel. It might be able to heat the dog basket, but that'd be it. 0344 499 1000. This is Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
524. We'll go back to more of your calls and comments in a few moments' time. First, this story. BBC Director General Tim Davie says the broadcaster must play a key role in restoring public trust, which he described as being in crisis across the UK. This was a conference in Manchester where Tim Davie said new steps will soon be announced to address the issue. His comments come as pressure mounts on the BBC to remove Gary Lineker after the Match of the Day host shared a pro-Palestinian video featuring a rat emoji, imagery historically linked to anti-Semitic propaganda. And there are various other stories such as this, and you can look at Hugh Edwards and goodness knows what else. Let's get a word on this from Richard Tate, who's a former BBC Trust member. Richard, good afternoon to you. I mean, I appreciate the BBC are always in this, you know, damned if we do, damned if we don't. Will we? You know, if you're not a fan of the BBC, you're never going to support them. If you love the BBC, you'll always. So that it's a never-end, it's sort of circular kind of problem that they will always sort of have to some degree. But fundamentally, do you sense, different from any other time, Richard, there is an issue of trust with the state broadcaster?
Hello, Ian. Yeah, I think there is an issue of trust actually with all our institutions at present. As you said in introduction, there are low levels of trust. There's a survey called Edelman, which each year looks at levels of trust across the world. And last year it found that people in Britain had less trust in governments and public institutions and their health service than any other country in the developed world. And it's gone up only a couple of points, 4 points, I think, now in the last year. I think we have a crisis of trust. I think you're right, the BBC is part of that. BBC is a really important institution. We're a polarized society. People feel very angry about things. They also don't really trust the institutions they used to rely on. And I think BBC's caught some of that. However, having said that, when you ask people who they trust most as a media organization or as a journalistic organization, they still say the BBC. So I think Tim Davie is right to say that the BBC is part of the solution as well as, if you like, part of the problem.
Yeah, and I guess it's, you know, again, you'll never please all of the people all of the time. I think we all sort of understand that. Do you think, and again, this is no different to other broadcasters in this respect, but I suppose it's always going to be slightly different for the BBC because it's funded by the taxpayer. And that is the inability to sometimes act because, you know, senior management are afraid if something goes wrong, you know, we're always talking about Gary Lineker and the like, but there are other examples. They are almost scared of challenging it or almost slightly terrified that they're going to lose their big signing or something like that. Hugh Edwards, Gary Lineker, I mean, there are others on that list. Is there a fundamental problem with that? I don't know if there's a name for this thing, but it sounds like there should be. I'm sure the Germans have got a name for it.
I think there's a slightly more general problem, and there has been for some time, in the media industries, that there's been a growing gap in the power between, if you like, the top talent and often quite junior, sometimes quite freelance, inexperienced, not particularly securely employed producers. And I think at the heart of some of these problems about how big name presenters behave has been an issue of editorial control, that producers have not been empowered to deal with these issues at the level that they should have. But I think to defend the BBC management a bit, their issue is, of course, that everybody pays for the BBC, and therefore everybody has a view, and also everybody has the right to see stuff on the BBC which they feel is for them. Even though it may not be for other people. And so I think one of the reasons why the BBC appears to be, I think, sometimes, I worked in commercial television as well, commercial television can be much more ruthless and much more decisive, is you've got shareholders to worry about, and you've got the public, but also you're aware the public are probably paying your wages.
Of course.
Directly through advertising or subscription. And I think the BBC, because it's a public body in the way that it is, occasionally moves more slowly. But I think the people who run it are well-intentioned and actually do try and act in the best interests of all the licence fee payers, which is not always easy to do.
On the wider point, Richard, do you, I mean, is there a way that going forward the BBC can really sustain that model? I look back, I was very defensive of the BBC for a long time. I look back at my childhood, I think of Saturday Night, I think of The Generation Game, I think of Doctor Who, I think of Starsky and Hutch and Parkinson. I mean, goodness me, the licence fee was worth paying just for that one night alone. What great evenings they were. But of course, it's increasingly hard, isn't it, to use that argument now, because we have Netflix, we have Amazon Prime, we have Apple TV, we have Disney, we have...
Absolutely.
Oh, goodness me, Paramount. I mean, the list goes on. I can no longer find a set of words that could, other than the romantic notion of what it once was for me, I can't really find an argument to defend the BBC anymore.
Well, I think you're absolutely right to talk about the rise of Netflix and these streaming services, which are now enormously powerful. I think the interesting thing about Tim Davie's speech was that he talked about the things that the streamers can't do. They don't want to do news. They don't want to do education. Mm-hmm. They don't want to cover events in the nations and regions and in the towns and villages of Britain. They don't want to fund debate programs. He's now talking about regional versions of Question Time. There are a whole range of things which the BBC, and I think ITV and Channel 4 and Channel 5, the BBC rivals, but also part of the public service broadcasting system, there are still things they can do which are valuable. And I think the fact he didn't talk very much about drama and comedy and entertainment shows that he probably understands that the BBC is going to have to move more into an area where it does the sort of things that we're now discussing, than worry about trying to compete with Hollywood for, you know, the David Tennant's signature on a contract, because the great talents are going to go to the big projects.
Of course. And I get, you know, even things like Strictly, which I know is a huge hit for the BBC, and the format's been sold around the world. It's absolutely massive. But, you know, there's not unreasonable arguments that it has no place on the BBC. You know, Panorama, fine. Strictly Come Dancing, not sure.
Well, that's a big argument. There's always been the argument at the BBC. When I was at the BBC board, the argument always was, and I think it's still valid, and you're right, it's changing. It's not going to last much longer, but I think it'll last maybe the term of this next BBC contract. Another 10 years, I think, is what they'll probably get. It is that even though there's not as much as you would like to see, there is still, for most people, something which is unique. I mean, for example, you're going to talk about Gary Lineker in a minute. Free football late on a Saturday night still has a value. I know you can get a lot of it online, and I know you get a lot of it on pay television, but it still, for some people, has quite a lot of value. They can watch the main matches for nothing, you know, with Gary Lineker and Alan Shearer, and that's part of their lives. The soaps and Strictly are still part of the mix in the same way as Panorama or Newsnight or Question Time or their educational programmes.
Well, I'm bound to ask. You just mentioned Gary Lineker, and in fact, Tim Davie was asked about Gary Lineker at this conference in Manchester. He diplomatically declined to name names, but he did say, when it comes to presenters, I'll just say that, you know, the BBC reputation is held by everyone, and when someone makes a mistake, it costs us. And I think we absolutely need people to be exemplars of the BBC values and follow our social media policy. Simple as that. So he is kind of responding to Gary Lineker there in a way. I mean, Lineker's going anyway, other than some specific projects. But not the first time the former England ace has found himself in hot political water for a bloke that's meant to commentate on football.
Yeah, and of course last year we had the match of the day strike, and we had all the news crews chasing Gary and his dog around Barnes Common, trying to get a statement. It became a big story. I mean, I think two things. I mean, first of all, I think that the image and that he tweeted was awful, and I absolutely understand why it offended people. But he's taken it down, and his agent said it was a mistake. I think it's a very difficult balance, isn't it? Because I think people like him who are seen to represent the BBC in some ways, they're not like you, they're not a presenter of a news or current affairs programme, therefore they're not under the strict, if you like, obligations of impartiality that journalists are. But they are expected, as Tim Davie said, you know, not to do things which get the organisation into trouble, and this clearly has. On the other side, I would actually say he is a sports presenter. This is a very polarising issue where people have very sincere but very bitterly opposed views about the rights and wrongs of the conflict in the Middle East. It's an area which I'm sure Tim Davie wishes Gary Lineker didn't dip into quite so often, but he is entitled to a certain extent to his point of view, unless he causes upset beyond what is compatible with being a BBC presenter, and I think that's quite a delicate balance.
I mean, look, if Clive Myrie suddenly put out vote reform on his Twitter feed, naturally, I imagine poor old Clive, who I love to bits, would be walking the plank tomorrow. But, you know, this is a sports presenter, but very sort of intrinsically linked with the heart and soul of the BBC, so it kind of moves into almost a different category when it's...
No, you're right, Ian, and that's why, in fact, the BBC did commission a very sensible man called John Hardy, who used to be my boss at ITN. He was chief executive of ITN, and he produced a very sensible report that said, look, these sort of presenters have got to be careful because they have an extra responsibility, but they also have the right to express their own views about matters of politics and matters of current affairs. And so there's a balance between, if you like, their duty to the BBC as an employer and their right as individuals to express their views, even if those views upset people. Now, I don't think that tweet is part of freedom of expression. I think that tweet was wrong. But I do think this dispute, which is still running with complaints heading for the Director General's desk, it does show both how bitterly the Middle Eastern issue has divided people in this country as well as around the world. But I think there has to be a bit of a sense of perspective. I mean, if you're concerned about what Panorama or the news is doing about Gaza, whether you're pro-Palestinian or pro-Israeli in terms of your arguments, you're absolutely right to pursue the organisations. Say, I saw the news at 10 last night, or I saw Panorama, or I saw that documentary on Gaza, and I feel it was wrong, and I think you should look into it. And the BBC should take those complaints very seriously, because these are, on both sides, these are people with sincerely held views. I think when you get to a complaint about retweeting carelessly something that you shouldn't retweet, when your main job is to analyse whether Nottingham Forest or Chelsea are going to be in the Champions League next year, I'm not in any way underestimating the offence that was caused, but I think there needs to be a sort of perspective.
Okay. Well, on that point, by the way, Chelsea is the answer to that question, but that's a whole other debate, Richard. Listen, lovely to have you on with us. Richard Tate, he's a former BBC Trust member, a bit of a legend in the world of media, television and the like. That's his view, that's his take on things. You might disagree, lines are open, this is Talk. Before we go any further, we've got an interesting call coming up about people that shouldn't be in jail in just a moment. Stand by for that. Time first to find out how you could be a chance of winning that amazing trip to Munich at the end of May to watch the biggest game in European football, the Champions League final. Thanks to our colleagues at TalkSport. We're also putting £5,000 into your pocket as well to spend how you like. Have a listen to the details.
Win a once-in-a-lifetime trip to watch the Champions League final live. Go to talksport.com/win for your chance to embark on the ultimate odyssey of football ecstasy. With 2 tickets to the Champions League final live at the iconic Munich Football Arena, Germany, including flights, accommodation and an uber-massive £5,000 in your hand. How about that? Enter online now at talksport.com/win. Terms and conditions apply. Achtung, baby.
18 plus, UK, excluding Northern Ireland. For a chance to win all of that, simply text the word football to 83338 by the 16th of May at 11 p.m. Text costs £2 plus 1 standard network rate message. You must have the bill payer's permission, or send your name and number by post to Champions League final competition, PO Box 3190, Colchester CO2 8GP, to arrive by 5 p.m. on the 21st of May. This is a TalkSport limited competition run on TalkSport Talk and Virgin Radio UK stations. Full terms and conditions at talksport.com.
think the whole conversation has changed. You know, some of us have got scars on our backs from fighting for this stuff for years and years, years in which it was not just unfashionable, but completely taboo to be aggressively questioning and challenging the scale of uncontrolled immigration. You know, those of us that have been at the forefront of this political debate have been called every name under the sun, and that's fine. We're used to it. You stick your neck out, you've got to be ready.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
We've had some incredible calls on the assisted dying story that we talked about earlier. I mean, it's one of those stories that some people are a bit reluctant to talk about, but some of I haven't got round to, just haven't had time to read all the messages and the WhatsApps and texts that have come through, but I'm really grateful for all of them, and apologies we didn't get round to reading it out, but they've been incredibly powerful on this, and have shown, I think, brilliantly both sides of a really clearly divisive argument. A bit of breaking news. The government will build 3 new prisons starting this year. This is part of a record prison expansion. This is the Justice Secretary, Shabana Mahmood, who is speaking. She's on her feet now in Downing Street, along with prison representation, part of a £4.7 billion plan to tackle overcrowding in England and Wales, which currently stands at 99% capacity. Is projected to see space for adult male prisoners run out in November 2025. Never hear about female prisons, do we? Women's prisons. Never ever hear about that. She also confirmed recall times will be limited for offenders serving between 1 and 4 years. How long is it going to take to build them? There's the big question. Get them done by Christmas. You might get some votes out of that. Spoiler alert, you won't. This is Dave in Manchester on Net Zero. How you doing, Dave?
Yeah, I'm all right, mate.
Good. What are you thinking?
I'm thinking about Net Zero. I'm thinking about the energy costs.
Go on.
Gas, electric.
What are your thoughts?
Well, what my thoughts are? Well, I use gas electric once a day at the minute.
Okay.
With the weather as it is. And it's nice and warm, thank God, and it has been for a while.
Yeah.
But my gas electric every week, Ian, is costing me just short of £25. That's £100 a month. I live on my own, and the only time I use gas electric is basically to have a brew in the morning, and then come home, pop the microwave on, 4-minute meal, spag bol, something like that.
Yeah.
And that is it.
And other than putting your lights on?
Well, I don't put the lights on because, you know, I'm in bed by 9 and it's still light.
That's very...
You know what I mean?
You never need to put the lights on. It's a really good point, actually.
Well,
you don't need to put the lights on.
Go to the loo.
Yeah. Well, there is that if you wake up in the night, but that's not going to... So where do they get 25 quid a week? So £100 a month for a microwave and a kettle.
The guy is out of control. He's an absolute maniac. I mean, I said to... I saw Kev a few months ago.
Yeah.
And I said to him, this guy's a problem, like the whole of the Labour government. And he said something to me that was hilarious and I couldn't stop by. I actually threw up a can of Coca-Cola. He says the whole lot, including the 6. It's not just him.
Yeah.
It's not the Miliband tribe that are a problem. You've got Cooper, who thinks everything's sorted out with immigration and there's 400 landing in Kent every day.
That's a very good... she thinks that's a result.
Of a Prime Minister that's saying, oh, I'm doubling back, I'm doubling up and doubling down. I don't know what he's doubling up about.
He's doubling, tripling, he's doing all sorts. He's carrying on as he were. We're going to go harder and faster on our beliefs, he said. Well, his beliefs have been pretty wonky so far.
Well, the guy's a maniac. He's not a politician. He's not an economist. He's a lawyer.
Yeah.
Who, for one, got a bad news criminal freed, who was well known, and I'm not going to mention names and out like that. And that's exactly what he did.
Well, yeah, but in fairness to him on that point, I mean, that is what lawyers do, isn't it? They give the evidence to the court, and then the court decides.
Yeah, no, when you're Prime Minister, Ian.
Yeah, but he didn't do it as Prime Minister.
Yeah, but he is now.
Well, he is now, yes.
So the point is, he's brought his lawyer our celery movement with him to politics, and it doesn't work because he wants to be mates to everybody.
Yeah, well, you see, that's always the big danger. Listen, I've got to move, Dave, because we've hit the end of the show, but thank you for that. Yeah, trying to appease everybody never works. Ian says, come on, Ian, if solar panels were profitable, energy companies would supply them for free in exchange for half-price bills. Wouldn't it be the other way round? They wouldn't want to supply them because of half-price bills, because they don't want to have too many half-price bills. Tony says, what business is it of anybody how I die? At the moment, I'm the only person dying, irrespective of how many people are around me. It's my choice alone, and I should have it. And if it remains like that and put like that, that makes common sense. That noise of a crinkly bag you just heard was... I'm not referring to Alex here. I'm referring to what she was... Yes, here's a crinkly bag. I'm referring to what you were carrying when you walked in.
Right.
It was a crinkly bag, wasn't it?
Yes, a paper bag. It did crinkle a bit.
I'm
sorry.
Whether you were going to pull out some prizes or...
Well, if you want an olive or a goose egg, then I can help you out.
Oh, you love your goose egg.
Do you want to see one?
Go on, these are massive.
They're big uns. We're never going to be able to roll this back up, but this is... I mean, wait till you see this absolute corker.
Look at that belter.
Look at that absolute belter.
There's a goose in there.
It's massive. I mean, it actually kind of inside the shell, it doesn't look as ridiculous as it looks when it's cracked
I think
open.
I asked you this last time. When you crack it open to fry, if you wanted to fry it, is it noticeably a bigger egg, like the sort of thing that would be in a Tim Burton film or something?
Exactly. And it's sort of, I think the yolk to white ratio is even more favourable to the yolk. So you've got like a yolk sort of the size of...
Although, am I right in
amazing.
saying... We always end up talking about food, don't we?
I know.
Am I right in saying...
Everyone wants to know what's in my crinkly bag.
The healthy bit of the egg is actually the white bit, not the yellow bit. Is that right?
No, because yolk's full of omegas and it's got sort of good cholesterol.
I knew you'd know this.
Lowers cholesterol. So no good fat that lowers cholesterol.
Right, so the yellow, the tasty bit, basically, is the better bit.
And it's also got stuff that cures dementia and...
Really?
And cancer and...
So that's why you go big on the goose eggs?
Basically, you're supposed to have, like, 3 eggs a day at least. There's a specific thing that's found in pretty much just eggs, and to get your daily allowance, you're supposed to have 3 eggs.
Protein is in eggs, of course.
Protein is in eggs,
Good on protein.
I love a bit of protein.
Yeah, have you ever... I did this for a little while, and that's necking egg whites.
Why did you do that?
Because I was doing the whole, you know, I went through a bit of a gym thing. You don't get to look like this just by laying in bed all day, Alex, come on. And somebody said, oh, the best protein you can have is the egg white. Separate it from the yellow, stick 3 or 4 of them in a cup and down it in one.
That sounds really like...